On the morning of August 8th, 1897, the people of Whitby, a small coastal town in Yorkshire, England, woke to find something impossible sitting in their harbour. A ship, a Russian schooner called the Demeter. But it was not the presence of the ship that was strange, it was the way it had arrived. The night before had brought one of the most violent storms anyone could remember. Thunder had shaken the windows, lightning had turned the Black Sea white. The wind had screamed like something alive and furious, and through that chaos, through waves that should have destroyed it, the Demeter had come sailing into port at full speed, as if pushed by an invisible hand. When the morning light revealed the ship clearly, the harbour master and a group of men rowed out to meet it. They called out to the crew. No answer. They called again. Silence. So they climbed aboard, and what they found would become the talk of the town for months, whispered about in pubs and homes, a mystery that no one could explain. The ship was deserted, completely empty. No crew, no captain, no living soul aboard. Except that wasn't quite true. Lashed to the ship's wheel with thick rope, his hands frozen in a death grip around the wood, was the body of the captain. He had been dead for days, his face locked in an expression of absolute terror, but his eyes were open, staring forward, as if even in death he had refused to look away from whatever he had seen. Clutched in his stiffening fingers was a crucifix, and tied to his wrist was a small leather journal. The harbour master took the journal and began to read, and what he found in those pages was a story of horror, a story of a crew that had vanished, one by one, night after night, until only the captain remained. A story of something in the cargo hold, something that hunted them. The authorities searched the ship from bow to stern. They found the cargo, 50 large wooden boxes filled with earth. Just dirt, nothing else. No contraband, no explanation. The boxes were addressed to various properties in London, already paid for, ready to be delivered. And then someone noticed something else. In all the confusion of the storm and the discovery of the dead captain, in all the chaos of the early morning, no one had been watching the ship carefully. But several witnesses would later swear they saw it. The moment the ship struck the harbour, before anyone could board, something had moved on the deck. Something large and black. A shape that moved too fast to be clearly seen. It was a dog, they said. An enormous black dog with burning red eyes. It had leapt from the ship onto the dock, and before anyone could react, it had vanished into the narrow streets of the town, racing up the hill toward the old cemetery that overlooked the sea. They searched for the dog. They never found it. The Demeter sat in Whitby harbour. A ghost ship, a mystery, a dark story that would be retold in the local newspaper. The 50 boxes of earth were quietly collected by a delivery company and sent on to London as instructed. The captain's body was buried with honour. The journal was filed away in the harbour master's office, and life in Whitby went back to normal. But something had arrived on that ship, something that had travelled across thousands of miles, hidden in a box of grave dirt, patient and silent and hungry. It had come to England with a purpose. It had come with a plan, and it was already hunting. This was how the most famous monster in literary history arrived in the civilized world. Not with fanfare, but in silence. Not with an army, but alone. Not in the light, but hidden in a ship of the dead. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you believe that the greatest stories ever told deserve to be explored, that the line between myth and masterpiece is worth investigating, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support allows us to keep diving into the narratives that have shaped our nightmares. Tonight, we will walk through the pages of the most influential horror novel ever written. We will follow an Englishman into a castle of nightmares. We will board the ghost ship and witness its terrible voyage. We will watch an ancient evil arrive in modern London. We will see the desperate hunt to destroy a monster that cannot die. This is not ancient folklore. This is not legend passed down through generations. This is a story that was written in 1897 by a theatre manager named Bram Stoker, a man who never left Britain while writing it, who spent 7 years researching and crafting a tale that would define horror for the next century and beyond. But before we meet the man who created the monster, we must meet the monster itself. We must walk where he walked. We must enter his castle. We must understand his plan. And we must meet the man who was foolish enough or unlucky enough to be the first to shake the hand of Count Dracula. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. His name was Jonathan Harker. He was 27 years old, a solicitor, a lawyer, working for a respectable firm in London called Hawkins and Harker. He was engaged to be married to a woman named Mina Murray, a schoolteacher, intelligent and kind. They were planning their wedding. They were planning their future. Jonathan Harker had every reason to believe his life would be ordinary, comfortable, and safe. And then his employer, Mr. Hawkins, gave him an assignment. A client, a foreign nobleman, a count from Transylvania, was purchasing property in England. The transaction was complex. The client was very particular, and he had specifically requested that a representative from the firm travel to his castle to finalize the paperwork in person. It was an honor, really. A chance to prove himself, a chance to travel. Jonathan Harker had never left England. The journey to Eastern Europe would be an adventure, something to tell his children about one day. Mr. Hawkins was too old to make the trip himself, so Jonathan would go in his place. The client's name was Count Dracula. Jonathan packed his bags, kissed Mina goodbye, promised to write every day, and boarded a train heading east. He brought with him a leather journal, and he wrote down everything he saw. The journal still exists. We have it. And what it records is a descent from the modern world into something ancient, something that should not exist, something that was waiting for him. The first part of Jonathan's journey was easy. Comfortable trains carried him across Europe, London to Paris, Paris to Munich, Munich to Vienna. These were modern cities, filled with electric lights and bustling crowds and the hum of progress. The trains ran on time, the hotels were clean, everything was orderly and rational and safe. But then he crossed into Eastern Europe, and something began to change. The trains became older, slower, less reliable. The cities became smaller. The language became unfamiliar. He was traveling backward through time, away from the world of science and steam engines and telegrams, into a world of old superstitions and dark forests and roads that hadn't changed in centuries. He arrived in a town called Bistritz, in the region of Transylvania, in what is now Romania. The town was the last stop before the final leg of his journey into the mountains. he stayed at an inn called the Golden Crone, and he showed the innkeeper the letter from Count Dracula, explaining that he was expected at the castle. The reaction was immediate and disturbing. The innkeeper's face went pale. His wife crossed herself and whispered something in Romanian that Jonathan didn't understand. Other guests in the inn stared at him with a mixture of pity and fear. The innkeeper's wife took Jonathan aside. She begged him not to go. She didn't speak much English, but she made him understand. The castle was evil. The Count was not a normal man. Jonathan would be in terrible danger. Jonathan tried to explain that this was simply business. He had a job to do. He couldn't just abandon it because of local superstitions. The woman looked at him with deep sadness, as if he were already dead, and then she did something strange. She took off her own crucifix, a simple cross on a silver chain, and pressed it into his hands. She closed his fingers around it, and she said one word in English: "Please." Jonathan, rational and modern and English, felt foolish, but he put the crucifix in his pocket. If it would make her feel better, what was the harm? He thanked her for her kindness, finished his meal, and went to bed, planning to leave for the castle in the morning. But that night, he had terrible dreams. Dreams of red eyes watching him from the darkness. Dreams of something waiting for him in the mountains. Dreams of a voice whispering his name. He woke in the morning sweating and afraid, though he couldn't remember why. The next day, Jonathan took a coach with other travelers heading into the mountains. The plan was simple. The coach would take him to a place called the Borgo Pass, high in the Carpathian Mountains. There, at midnight, the Count's own carriage would meet him and take him the rest of the way to Castle Dracula. As they climbed into the mountains, the landscape became wild and beautiful and frightening. Jagged peaks, deep forests of pine and fir, villages that looked like they hadn't changed since medieval times, and everywhere the crosses. Crucifixes at crossroads, crucifixes on doorways, crucifixes hanging from trees, as if the people here were trying to keep something out or keep something in. The other passengers in the coach kept glancing at Jonathan with those same pitying looks he had received at the inn. One old man kept making a sign with his fingers, a sign against the evil eye. A woman gave him a small charm, a twist of garlic wrapped in cloth, and pressed it into his hand before he could refuse. Jonathan felt like he was traveling not just through space, but through time. Everything rational and modern was falling away behind him. He was entering a world that believed in vampires and demons, and things that hunted in the night. The coach arrived at the Borgo Pass exactly at midnight. The moon was full, bright and cold, casting sharp shadows across the snow-covered ground. The mountains rose on all sides like the walls of a prison. And there, waiting in the moonlight, was the Count's carriage. It was a large, old-fashioned vehicle, black and elegant, pulled by 4 magnificent black horses. But something about it was wrong. The horses made no sound, no snorting, no stamping of hooves. They stood perfectly still, like statues, like they weren't breathing, and the driver. Jonathan couldn't see the driver's face. He was wrapped in a great black cloak, his hat pulled low, his features hidden in shadow. He didn't speak. He simply gestured for Jonathan to get in. The other passengers in the coach looked at Jonathan one last time. One woman was crying. Jonathan tried to smile, to show them he was fine, that they were being ridiculous. But his hands were shaking as he picked up his luggage. He climbed into the Count's carriage. The door closed, and without a word or a command, the horses began to move, pulling the carriage off the main road and onto a narrow, winding path that led deeper into the mountains. Jonathan looked back. The coach and its passengers were already disappearing into the distance. He was alone now, alone with the silent driver and the silent horses, racing through the night toward Castle Dracula. The journey to the castle was like a nightmare. The carriage moved impossibly fast, the horses never slowing, never tiring. The path was treacherous, steep cliffs on one side, sheer drops on the other. But the driver navigated it with perfect confidence, as if he could see in the dark. And perhaps he could. Because hours later, when Jonathan looked up at the driver again, he could swear that in the moonlight, the man's eyes were glowing red, like the eyes of a wolf. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the carriage passed through a massive stone archway and entered a courtyard. Jonathan looked up and saw it. Castle Dracula. It was enormous, a fortress, really, built into the side of a mountain, its walls thick and ancient, its towers reaching toward the sky. It looked like something from a fairy tale or a nightmare, beautiful and terrible at the same time. A castle fit for a king or a monster. The carriage stopped, the door opened, and standing in the doorway of the castle, illuminated by a single torch, was a tall, thin figure in black. "Welcome to my house." The voice was deep, cultured, aristocratic. "Enter freely and of your own will." Jonathan stepped out of the carriage, his legs stiff from the long journey. He looked up at his host. Count Dracula was a tall man, thin but not weak. He was dressed in black from head to toe, old-fashioned but immaculately tailored. His face was striking, sharp features, a high forehead, a nose like the beak of a bird of prey. His hair was thick and dark, but streaked with white. His mustache was heavy, but it was the eyes that Jonathan would remember. They were piercing, intelligent, and somehow ancient. Eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that knew too much. And when the Count smiled, his teeth were very white and very sharp. The Count extended his hand. "I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome, Mr. Harker, to my house. Come in. The night air is chill, and you must need to eat and rest." Jonathan shook the Count's hand. It was like shaking hands with a corpse. The hand was ice cold. The grip was strong, too strong, the strength of iron, not flesh. And the skin, it was wrong. Too pale, too smooth, like marble. Jonathan pulled his hand back, trying not to show his discomfort. The Count smiled, as if he knew exactly what Jonathan was feeling, and gestured for him to enter. Jonathan Harker picked up his bags and walked through the doorway of Castle Dracula. The door closed behind him with a heavy, final sound. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Jonathan realized something terrible, something he couldn't quite put into words yet. He had just walked into a trap. The first few days were strange, but not openly dangerous. The Count was a perfect host, courteous, intelligent, fascinated by England and eager to learn everything Jonathan could teach him about London, about English customs, about the properties he had purchased. They would sit together in the Count's library late into the night, poring over maps and documents. Dracula asked endless questions. Where were the best neighborhoods? How did the legal system work? What were the social customs? He seemed particularly interested in crowds, in places where many people gathered. Theaters, markets, train stations. Jonathan answered as best he could, though some of the Count's questions seemed odd. Why did he want to know about the population density of different districts? Why did he care about the busiest times of day at Liverpool Street Station? But the Count was paying well, and the work was straightforward, so Jonathan continued. And yet, there were things that bothered him. Small things at first, things that didn't make sense. The castle had no servants, at least Jonathan never saw any. Yet his room was always clean, his bed always made, and meals appeared on the table as if by magic. Who was doing this work? And when? The Count only appeared at night. He would make excuses. He had business to attend to during the day. He had correspondence to write. But Jonathan never saw him in daylight, not once. And then there were the mirrors. Jonathan had a small shaving mirror in his room. One evening, the Count came to check on him while he was shaving. Jonathan looked up to greet him, to gesture to the chair by the window. But in the mirror, there was no reflection. Jonathan could see himself, the room, the window behind him. But where the Count should have been standing, there was nothing, just empty air. Jonathan spun around, startled. The Count was there, solid and real, standing not 3 feet away. But in the mirror, nothing. The Count's eyes narrowed. He had seen Jonathan's reaction. And then his gaze fell on the shaving mirror, and his face twisted into an expression of rage, so sudden and so violent that Jonathan stepped back in fear. "Take care how you cut yourself," the Count said, his voice low and dangerous. "It is more dangerous than you think in this country." And then, before Jonathan could respond, the Count grabbed the mirror and hurled it out the window. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the courtyard below. The Count's face smoothed back into calm politeness, as if nothing had happened. He wished Jonathan a good evening and left the room. Jonathan stood there, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. What had just happened? Why did the Count have no reflection? What kind of man had no reflection? That night, Jonathan tried to leave his room after dark. He had decided he wanted to explore the castle a bit, to get some air, to clear his head. But when he tried the door to his bedroom, it was locked. From the outside, he was a prisoner. Over the following days, Jonathan began to understand the horror of his situation. He was not a guest. He was a captive. The Count continued their work sessions, but the mask of hospitality was slipping. Sometimes, Jonathan would catch the Count staring at him with an expression of barely controlled hunger. The Count's eyes would fixate on Jonathan's throat, on the pulse of blood just beneath the skin. Jonathan found other disturbing things. He discovered that he could move around the castle during the day when the Count was absent. He explored room after room, hallway after hallway, but every door that led outside was locked. Every window was either too high or too small to escape through. He was in a maze, and the maze had no exit. And then, one afternoon, while searching desperately for a way out, Jonathan found a door he hadn't tried before. It led down a winding stone staircase into the oldest part of the castle. The air grew cold and damp. The walls were ancient stone, predating the castle above. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a chapel, or what had once been a chapel. Now it was defiled, filthy, smelling of earth and decay. And in the chapel, arranged in neat rows, were approximately 50 large wooden boxes, all filled with earth, freshly dug earth from a grave. Jonathan's hands were shaking as he approached one of the boxes. He looked inside, and there, lying in the earth like a corpse in a coffin, was Count Dracula. The Count's eyes were open, but unseeing. His mouth was slightly open, and his lips were red, bright red, as if stained with fresh blood. His skin was bloated, fuller than it had been the night before, as if he had fed well. Jonathan understood in that moment the truth, the terrible, impossible truth. Count Dracula was not a man. He was a vampire, a creature that fed on blood, that slept in grave dirt, that had no reflection because it had no soul, an undead thing, a monster that should not exist but did. And Jonathan Harker was trapped in a castle with it. He ran, he fled back up the stairs, his mind reeling, his breath coming in panicked gasps. He had to escape, he had to get out, he had to warn someone, anyone, that this creature was planning to travel to London, to one of the most populated cities in the world, where it could hunt freely among millions of unsuspecting victims. But how? The doors were locked. The windows were barred. He was trapped in a castle on a mountain, miles from any help. That night, the Count visited Jonathan's room one last time. He was leaving, he said, traveling to England ahead of schedule. And Jonathan would remain here, as a guest, forever. "You may write letters to your loved ones," the Count said with a cold smile. "Tell them you are well. Tell them you have extended your stay. Tell them not to worry." The subtext was clear. "Lie to them, or I will kill you now." Jonathan wrote the letters, his hand shaking, knowing they were probably the last words Mina would ever receive from him. After the Count left, Jonathan made a desperate decision. If he was going to die here, he would die trying to escape, not waiting like a sheep in a pen. He would climb. The castle walls were steep, the stones old and crumbling in places, but there were cracks, ledges, places where a desperate man might find a handhold. Jonathan Harker, the proper English solicitor who had never taken a physical risk in his life, climbed out his window and began to descend the castle wall like a spider, hundreds of feet above the rocks below. He didn't look down. He couldn't. One slip, one moment of weakness, and he would fall to his death. But death by falling was better than death by the Count's teeth. He made it to a lower window and climbed inside. He was in a different part of the castle now, a section he had never been able to access. He searched frantically for an unlocked door, a way out, anything, and he found the Count's room. The room where the creature slept during the day. The room where the boxes of earth were being prepared for transport. Jonathan read the shipping manifest scattered on the Count's desk. His blood turned to ice. The boxes, all 50 of them, were being sent to England, to London, to the properties the Count had purchased. The creature was creating safe houses, lairs scattered across the city where it could rest during the day, protected and hidden. Dracula wasn't just moving to England. He was preparing for an invasion, a hunting ground with 7 million potential victims, a feast that could last for centuries. Jonathan realized he had to stop this. He had to get out. He had to warn someone, but first, he had to survive. He heard footsteps, heavy footsteps. The Count was returning. Jonathan ran. He found a door, forced it open, and fled down a hallway he'd never seen before. Behind him, he heard the Count's voice, calm and amused. "Mr. Harker, you disappoint me. I had such hopes for our friendship." Jonathan ran faster. He found a window, too small for a man, but he didn't care. He forced himself through it, tearing his clothes, scraping his skin, not caring about the pain. He emerged on a narrow ledge on the outside of the castle wall. And below him, far below, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The Count, Dracula, climbing down the sheer castle wall like an insect, moving with inhuman speed and grace, his cloak billowing behind him, his face turned upward, smiling. "There is nowhere to run, Mr. Harker," the Count called up to him. "This is my castle. You are mine." Jonathan Harker had two choices: climb down and face the Count, or climb up and return to his prison. He chose neither. He jumped, he fell, not to the rocks far below, but to a lower roof, a chapel roof covered in old tiles. He hit hard, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs, pain shooting through his body. But he was alive. He scrambled down the roof, found a broken window, and threw himself inside. He was in the old chapel again, the one with the boxes of earth. But he didn't stop. He found a door, burst through it, and ran into the forest beyond. Behind him, he heard the Count's laughter, echoing through the castle like the howl of a wolf. Jonathan Harker ran through the night, through the dark Transylvanian forest, with no idea where he was going, knowing only that he had to get away, had to survive, had to warn the world. Because the monster was coming. Dracula was coming to England, and no one knew, no one was ready. And in London, two young women, Mina Murray and Lucy Westenra, were enjoying a summer holiday by the sea, walking the cliffs of Whitby, watching the ships in the harbour, completely unaware that an ancient evil was crossing the ocean to find them. The Demeter had already set sail. The Count was already aboard, hidden in a box of grave dirt, patient and still and hungry. The ship of death was on its way, and no one could stop it, could. To understand what happened aboard the Demeter, we must first understand that Count Dracula was not a mindless monster. He was intelligent, strategic, patient. He had lived for centuries, and he had learned that survival required planning. His decision to move to England was not impulsive. It was calculated. Transylvania was becoming dangerous for him. The old superstitions were fading, yes, but not fast enough. The peasants still knew the signs. They still knew how to protect themselves. Garlic, crucifixes, holy water. They still whispered his name in fear, and a few brave souls had even attempted to hunt him over the years. He had survived, of course, but it was inconvenient. England, by contrast, was perfect. A modern nation that had forgotten the old ways. A nation that prided itself on reason, on science, on progress. A nation where the word vampire would be met with laughter, not fear. A nation where no one would believe in him until it was far too late. And London was a feast. 7 million people, packed into a sprawling city. So many that a few disappearances would go unnoticed. So many that he could hunt for decades, centuries, without depleting his supply. But moving to England required more than just desire. It required preparation. For months before Jonathan Harker's arrival, Dracula had studied. He had purchased books on English law, English customs, English geography. He had learned the language until he spoke it fluently, though with a slight aristocratic accent. He had hired agents, human agents, who knew nothing of his true nature, to purchase properties for him across London. Not one property, many. A network of safe houses, each with a box of his native soil, each a potential lair where he could rest during the vulnerable daylight hours. The boxes were key. Dracula was bound to the earth of his homeland. He needed to sleep in soil from Transylvania, soil consecrated by centuries of death and darkness. Without it, he would weaken and eventually die. So he had arranged for 50 boxes of earth to be dug from the ground around Castle Dracula, from the chapel, from the graveyard, from the cursed soil that had known his presence for hundreds of years. These boxes would be his anchors in the new world. All that remained was the journey itself. He would travel by ship, hidden during the day, emerging at night to ensure the voyage went smoothly. By the time the ship reached England, the crew would be gone, and he would slip into London unnoticed, just another anonymous immigrant in a city of millions. It was a perfect plan, and it almost worked. The ship was called the Demeter. It was a Russian schooner, not large but sturdy, designed for cargo transport across the Black Sea and beyond. It had a crew of 7 men: the captain, the first mate, and 5 sailors. These were experienced seamen, men who had spent their lives on the water, men who feared storms and rocks, but not superstition. The Demeter departed from the port of Varna on the western coast of the Black Sea on July 6th. The cargo manifest listed 50 large wooden boxes, described as containing silver sand or mold for industrial purposes in England. The boxes were loaded carefully into the hold below deck, stacked and secured. The client who had arranged the shipment never appeared in person. Everything had been handled through intermediaries, through letters and wire transfers of money. The payment was generous, more than generous actually. Enough that the captain didn't ask questions. The first mate, a superstitious man, had expressed some concern. The boxes were heavy, far too heavy to contain just dirt, and they had an odd smell, faint but unpleasant, like old graves. But the captain dismissed his worries. Cargo was cargo. As long as it was paid for, what did it matter? The weather was good. The sea was calm. The crew was in high spirits, eager to complete the voyage and return home with their pay. It was meant to be a routine job, Varna to the English coast, perhaps 2 weeks if the winds were favourable. For the first few days, it was exactly that, routine, easy. The ship sailed west, following the coast, and then north through the Bosporus Strait, leaving the Black Sea behind and entering the Aegean. The crew worked efficiently, rotating shifts, maintaining the ship, sharing meals and stories. But on the 4th night, something changed. One of the sailors, a young man named Petrovsky, was on the night watch. His job was simple: watch the horizon, check the rigging, make sure everything was secure. It was a quiet job, usually, peaceful. But that night, Petrovsky swore he heard something. A sound from below deck, from the cargo hold, a scraping sound, like something moving. He called out, asking if anyone else was down there. No response. He convinced himself it was just the cargo shifting as the ship moved through the waves, boxes settling, nothing unusual. But the sound continued, scraping, dragging, something heavy being moved across the wooden floor. Petrovsky went below to investigate. He took a lantern and descended the narrow stairs into the hold. The light from his lantern cast wild, dancing shadows across the stacked boxes. "Hello?" he called. "Is someone down here?" No answer. He moved deeper into the hold, stepping carefully over ropes and crates. He checked the boxes. They were all secure, None of them had shifted. So what had he heard? And then the lantern went out. Not because the oil had run out. It was still half full. Not because the wind had blown it out. There was no wind down here. The flame just died, as if something had snuffed it out with invisible fingers. Petrovsky was plunged into absolute darkness. He heard breathing, not his own. Something else, something close. He ran. He scrambled back toward the stairs, his hands groping in the dark, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would burst. He found the stairs and climbed them 2 at a time, bursting back onto the deck, gasping for air. The other sailors asked what was wrong. He tried to explain, but his words came out in a jumble. Something in the hold, something watching him. The others laughed, told him he'd had too much rum, told him his imagination was playing tricks. But Petrovsky didn't go back down into the hold. Not ever. And that night, he disappeared. When the crew assembled for breakfast the next morning, Petrovsky was missing. The first mate checked his bunk, empty, the blanket cold. They searched the ship from bow to stern. He was nowhere to be found. The captain was furious. Had the fool fallen overboard during the night? Had he gotten drunk and stumbled over the rail? It seemed impossible. The sea had been calm, and Petrovsky was an experienced sailor, not some clumsy novice. But there was no other explanation. A man cannot simply vanish from a ship in the middle of the ocean. The captain made a note in the ship's log. July 11th. Seaman Petrovsky lost overboard during the night. Presumed drowned, cause unknown. The crew was shaken, but tried to carry on. Accidents happened at sea. It was a dangerous profession. They said a prayer for Petrovsky's soul and continued their work. But the mood on the ship had changed. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. The sailors glanced over their shoulders. They jumped at shadows, and no one wanted to go down into the cargo hold. 3 days later, another man disappeared. His name was Olgarin. He was on the night watch, just as Petrovsky had been. And just like Petrovsky, he was gone by morning, with no trace, no explanation, no body. Now, the crew was terrified. This was not an accident. This was not bad luck. Something was hunting them. The first mate demanded they investigate the cargo. "There's something down there," he said. "Something in those boxes. We need to open them." But the captain refused. They were transporting cargo, not smuggling. Opening a client's sealed boxes would be theft, a violation of maritime law. And besides, what could be in a box of dirt that could hurt anyone? The argument grew heated. Some of the crew sided with the first mate. They wanted to know what they were carrying. They wanted to feel safe again, but the captain held firm. They would not open the cargo. They would complete the voyage and collect their pay. That night, a third sailor disappeared. By now, the remaining crew, the captain, the first mate, and 2 sailors, were barely holding together. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, every creak of the wood, every gust of wind sent them into a panic. They took to sleeping in shifts, huddled together on the deck, refusing to go below. The first mate confronted the captain again. "We're all going to die," he said. "Whatever is down there, it's killing us one by one. We have to do something." The captain, his face haggard from lack of sleep and fear, finally agreed. They would investigate. They would go into the hold together, in the daylight, and they would open the boxes if necessary. The 4 remaining men descended into the cargo hold, armed with knives and belaying pins, their lanterns held high. The hold was exactly as it had been days ago. The boxes were undisturbed, still stacked neatly, still sealed. They approached the nearest box. The first mate used a crowbar to pry open the lid. It came free with a cracking sound. They lifted the lid and looked inside. It was filled with earth, just earth. Dark, rich soil, slightly damp, smelling of decay, nothing else. They opened another box, same thing, and another. Dirt, just dirt. "This is madness," the captain muttered. "It's just cargo. There's nothing here." But the first mate wasn't satisfied. There were 50 boxes. They had only checked 3. He moved deeper into the hold, toward the boxes stacked against the far wall, the ones in shadow, and then he stopped. One of the boxes, one near the back, was partially open. The lid hadn't been nailed shut properly, or perhaps it had been forced open from the inside. The first mate approached it slowly, his lantern shaking in his hand. He lifted the lid fully and looked inside. There was a man in the box, or what had once been a man. He was lying in the earth, perfectly still, his eyes closed, his hands folded across his chest. He wore archaic, aristocratic clothing, all in black. His face was pale, corpse pale, but he did not look dead. He looked asleep, as if he were simply resting, waiting. The first mate reached out, his hand trembling, and touched the figure's cheek. It was cold, ice cold, like marble, and then the eyes opened. They were red, burning, glowing red, like coals in a fire. The creature's mouth opened, revealing long, sharp teeth, and it hissed, a sound like a snake, like something that should not have a voice. The first mate screamed. He stumbled backward, dropping his lantern. The flame went out, plunging the hold into darkness. The other men ran. They fled up the stairs, the first mate right behind them, and they didn't stop until they were back on the deck in the sunlight, gasping and shaking.
"What was it?"
one of the sailors cried.
"What did you see?"
The first mate couldn't speak. He just shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. That night, the first mate disappeared. Now only 3 men remained, the captain and 2 sailors. And the 2 sailors had had enough. They wanted to abandon the ship. They would take the lifeboat, they said, and row toward the nearest coast. They would rather take their chances on the open sea than stay on this cursed vessel. The captain refused. "This is my ship," he said. "I will not abandon her." The sailors argued, pleaded, begged, but the captain would not be moved. He was the captain. He would not leave his ship. So the 2 sailors made their decision. That night, they lowered the lifeboat and rowed away into the darkness, leaving the captain alone. The captain watched them go. He knew he would probably never see them again. The sea was vast, and the lifeboat was small. But he understood their fear. He felt it too. He felt it in every fiber of his body. He was alone now, alone on a ship with a monster. He retrieved his crucifix from his cabin, a gift from his wife, given to him years ago for protection. He had never been a particularly religious man, but now he clutched it like a lifeline. He also took rope from the ship's stores and brought it to the wheel. He had a plan, a desperate final plan. If he was going to die, and he was certain now that he was, then he would die at his post. He would lash himself to the wheel so that even in death, he would hold the ship on course. The Demeter would reach England. The authorities there would find the ship, and they would find whatever this thing was. They would destroy it. They would stop it. He would not let the monster win. Over the next few nights, the captain stayed at the wheel, his crucifix clutched in one hand, his knife in the other. He did not sleep. He could not sleep. Every shadow, every sound made him grip the knife tighter. He saw the creature several times. It would appear on the deck, always in darkness, always just beyond the light of the captain's lantern. A tall, thin figure in black, with glowing red eyes and a smile that showed too many teeth. The creature would watch him, study him, and then it would disappear, fading into the shadows like mist. The captain knew what it was doing. It was toying with him, letting his fear grow, letting him exhaust himself, waiting for the moment when he would be too weak to resist. But the captain held on. He tied himself to the wheel with the rope, binding his hands so tightly that the rope cut into his skin. He lashed his body to the wooden spokes, making it impossible for him to fall or be pulled away. "Come on then," he shouted into the darkness. "If you're going to kill me, do it! But you will not have this ship!" The creature stepped forward into the light. Count Dracula, his face calm and patient, looked at the captain with something almost like respect. "You are brave," the count said in his deep, cultured voice, "for a mortal, but bravery will not save you." The captain raised his crucifix. The count hissed and stepped back, his face twisting in pain. The power of faith was real, and it burned him. "Stay back!" the captain shouted. "Stay back, demon!" The count smiled, showing his teeth. "I can wait," he said. "I am very, very patient." And he faded back into the darkness. The captain stayed at the wheel, holding the crucifix, praying to a god he had ignored for most of his life. He stayed there for one more night, and then another. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He was beyond hunger, beyond thirst. He was holding on through sheer force of will. But will has limits. On the night of August 7th, as the coast of England finally appeared on the horizon, the captain's strength finally gave out. His vision blurred. His hands went numb. The crucifix slipped from his fingers and fell to the deck, and Count Dracula stepped forward one last time. The storm that struck the English coast on the night of August 7th was one of the worst anyone in Whitby could remember. Thunder shook the foundations of houses. Lightning split the sky. The sea rose in great, towering waves that smashed against the cliffs. And through that storm, like a phantom, came the Demeter. The ship came racing into Whitby Harbour at full sail, impossibly fast, driven by something more than wind. It should have been torn apart by the rocks. It should have capsized in the waves. But it came on, straight and true, as if guided by an invisible hand. The ship struck the sand and rocks at the base of the east cliff with a grinding, tearing sound. And then it was still. The storm passed as quickly as it had come. By morning the sky was clear, the sea was calm, and the Demeter sat in the harbour like a ghost, its sails torn, its deck empty. The harbour master and a group of men rowed out to investigate. They called out. No response. They climbed aboard. The ship was deserted. No crew, no cargo visible on the deck. Just silence and the smell of the sea. And then they found the captain. He was lashed to the wheel, his hands tied with rope, his fingers frozen around a crucifix. His eyes were open, staring forward. His face was locked in an expression of absolute terror. He had been dead for at least a day, maybe more. In his jacket, they found his journal. The harbour master opened it and began to read. What he found in those pages was a story of madness, a story of a crew that vanished one by one, a story of something in the cargo hold, something that hunted them. The final entry, written in a shaking, barely legible hand, read, August 4th. It is here. I know it will come again. I am lashing myself to the wheel with my crucifix beside me. I shall not abandon my ship. If I am to die, I will die at my post. God have mercy on my soul. The authorities searched the ship thoroughly. They found the cargo hold. They found the 50 boxes of earth, all sealed, all accounted for. They found nothing else. No monster, no creature, no explanation, but several witnesses, dock workers, fishermen, people who had gathered to watch the strange ship come in, swore they saw something leap from the Demeter the moment it struck the shore. A huge black dog, they said. A dog with glowing red eyes. It leaped from the deck onto the sand, and before anyone could react, it raced up the path toward the town, heading straight for the old cemetery on the cliff above. They searched for the dog. They never found it. The captain's body was buried with honor. The Demeter was declared unseaworthy and eventually scrapped. The 50 boxes of earth were claimed by a delivery company. All the paperwork was in order, all the addresses confirmed, and transported to London, to the properties Count Dracula had purchased months earlier. The people of Whitby talked about the ghost ship for weeks. They told the story in pubs and parlours. The newspapers printed articles about it. It became a local legend, but within a month, it was forgotten. Life went on. Other news took its place. The ship of death became just another strange story, a curiosity, nothing more. No one noticed that after the Demeter arrived, several dogs in the town went missing. No one noticed that the sheep grazing on the cliffs near the cemetery began to die, their throats torn, their blood drained. No one noticed anything unusual at all, because Count Dracula had arrived in England. He had 50 safe houses waiting for him. He had a city of 7 million people to hunt in. He was invisible, anonymous, free, and he had already chosen his first victim. High on the cliffs, overlooking Whitby Harbour, 2 young women were taking their evening walk. They did this every night. It was their favourite part of the day, watching the sun set over the sea, feeling the wind in their hair, talking about their lives and their futures. Their names were Lucy Westenra and Mina Murray, best friends since childhood. Lucy was beautiful and vivacious, engaged to be married to a wealthy young man named Arthur Holmwood. Mina was practical and intelligent, a schoolteacher, engaged to Jonathan Harker, a solicitor who was currently travelling in Eastern Europe for work. They had no idea that Jonathan was fighting for his life in a castle in Transylvania. They had no idea that the ship they had watched arrive in the storm carried a monster. They walked through the old cemetery, admiring the ancient headstones, laughing at the Gothic inscriptions. Lucy was tired. She had been feeling oddly exhausted lately, sleeping poorly, plagued by strange dreams. "I keep dreaming of red eyes," Lucy said, laughing at herself. "Watching me from the darkness. Isn't that silly?" Mina smiled and linked her arm through Lucy's. "You've been reading too many ghost stories." They walked on, toward the ruins of Whitby Abbey, silhouetted against the darkening sky. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows. A tall, thin man in black, his face hidden by the growing darkness, his eyes glowing faintly red. Count Dracula smiled. He had found his prey. The hunt was about to begin. Lucy Westenra was 20 years old, and by all accounts, she was one of the most beautiful young women in London society. She had golden hair that caught the light like spun silk. Her eyes were bright and expressive. Her laugh was musical. She was kind, generous, and beloved by everyone who knew her. She was also, though she didn't know it yet, dying. Lucy and Mina had come to Whitby for a summer holiday, staying with an elderly relative who owned a house overlooking the harbour. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, sea air, long walks, quiet evenings reading by the fire. Lucy needed the rest. She had been through an exhausting social season in London, and she was preparing for her wedding to Arthur Holmwood, the son of Lord Godalming, a man of wealth and position. It should have been a happy time, and for the first few days it was. The two friends spent their days exploring the town, climbing the famous 199 steps that led from the harbour up to the clifftop cemetery and the ruins of Whitby Abbey. They would sit on the benches in the graveyard, looking out over the sea, talking about their futures. Lucy would talk about Arthur, about their wedding plans, about the house they would live in. Mina would talk about Jonathan, though with some worry. His letters from Transylvania had been brief and strange, and recently they had stopped altogether. But she tried not to dwell on it. Surely he was just busy with his work. Surely he would write soon. They would stay out until sunset, watching the sky turn orange and red and purple. And then they would walk back down the steps to their lodgings, arm in arm, laughing and content. But after the Demeter arrived, after the night of the great storm, something began to change in Lucy. It started with Lucy's sleep. She had always been a good sleeper, falling asleep easily and waking refreshed. But now she tossed and turned all night. She would wake up exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, complaining of terrible dreams. "I dreamed I was flying," she told Mina one morning, "or floating, and there was something calling to me, a voice, so beautiful and sad, asking me to come outside, to come to the window." Mina tried to comfort her. "It's just dreams, Lucy. You're overtired. You need rest." But the dreams continued. And then one night, Mina woke to find Lucy's bed empty. Mina's heart jumped into her throat. She checked the room. No Lucy. She checked the hall, the parlour, the kitchen. No sign of her friend. And then she saw it. The front door was standing open, moving slightly in the night breeze. Lucy had gone outside, in the middle of the night, in her nightgown. Mina grabbed a shawl and ran into the street. The town was dark and silent. Where would Lucy have gone? Mina remembered how Lucy had been fascinated by the cemetery, by the old churchyard on the cliff. She had said it was peaceful there, beautiful. Mina ran up the 199 steps, her lungs burning, her legs aching. She reached the top and looked around frantically, and there, in the moonlight, she saw her. Lucy was sitting on their favorite bench, the one that overlooked the sea, but she wasn't alone. There was a figure with her, a tall, thin figure in black, bent over Lucy as if whispering in her ear. As Mina watched, frozen in horror, the figure seemed to be leaning toward Lucy's throat. "Lucy!" Mina screamed. The figure's head snapped up. Mina saw its face for just a moment. Pale, sharp features, eyes that glowed red in the darkness. And then it was gone. Not walking away, not running, just gone. vanished into the shadows as if it had never been there. Mina ran to Lucy. Her friend was slumped on the bench, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She appeared to be asleep. Mina shook her gently. "Lucy! Lucy, wake up!" Lucy's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, confused. "Mina? What? Where am I?" "You were sleepwalking," Mina said, her voice shaking. "You came up here. Do you remember?" Lucy shook her head. I remember dreaming. Someone was calling me, and then nothing." Mina looked at Lucy's throat. There, just barely visible in the moonlight, were two small red marks, like puncture wounds, like teeth marks. Mina felt a cold terror settle in her stomach, but she didn't say anything. What could she say? That she had seen a monster? That something had been attacking Lucy? Lucy would think she was mad. Mina herself wasn't sure what she had seen. Perhaps it had been a trick of the moonlight. Perhaps her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and worry, had created something that wasn't there. She wrapped the shawl around Lucy's shoulders, careful to cover the marks on her throat. "Let's get you back to bed," she said. That night, Mina locked all the windows and doors, and she pushed her own bed against Lucy's door so that if Lucy tried to leave again, Mina would wake, but the damage had already been done. Over the following days, Lucy's condition worsened. She grew pale. The color drained from her cheeks, her lips, even her eyes seemed to lose their brightness. She was constantly tired, sleeping for hours during the day, but waking exhausted. She began to have trouble breathing, as if her lungs couldn't quite fill with air. She would press her hand to her chest and complain of a strange weakness, as if her very life force were draining away. Mina was terrified. She checked Lucy's throat every morning. The two marks were still there, small red dots that refused to heal. Sometimes they seemed to open slightly during the night, as if something had reopened the wounds. Mina wrote to Arthur, Lucy's fiancé, explaining that Lucy was unwell and needed to return to London to see proper doctors. Arthur immediately arranged for their travel. He met them at the train station, and Mina could see the shock on his face when he saw Lucy. She had deteriorated so much in just a few weeks. She was a shadow of the vibrant girl he had proposed to. Arthur brought Lucy to his family's London estate and called in the best physicians money could buy. They examined Lucy thoroughly. They tested her blood, her lungs, her heart. They could find nothing wrong with her. She appeared healthy in every measurable way, and yet she was clearly dying. One doctor suggested that perhaps it was a nervous condition, a disorder of the mind brought on by the stress of wedding preparations. Another suggested anemia, a deficiency of blood, though he couldn't explain why. A third simply shook his head and admitted he had no idea what was wrong. Arthur was desperate. He had lost his mother to illness just a year ago. He could not lose Lucy too. He turned to his old friend, Dr. John Seward, for help. Dr. John Seward was a young physician who ran a private lunatic asylum in the north of London. He had been one of Lucy's suitors years ago, before she had chosen Arthur. His proposal had been rejected, but he had remained a loyal friend to both of them. Seward examined Lucy and was as baffled as the other doctors had been, but he saw something in her symptoms, something strange and inexplicable that reminded him of cases he had heard about in his studies, cases that dealt with the realm between medicine and something else. He knew someone who might understand. his old mentor from his university days in Amsterdam, a man named Professor Abraham Van Helsing. Van Helsing was a Dutch physician, philosopher, and metaphysician. He was brilliant, holding degrees in medicine, philosophy, letters, and law. But he was also eccentric, interested in subjects that most respectable doctors would dismiss: folklore, ancient legends, the supernatural. Seward sent him a telegram. Need your expertise urgently. Patient dying of unknown cause. Please come to London immediately. Van Helsing arrived within 2 days. He was an older man, perhaps 60, with a sharp, intelligent face and piercing eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He spoke English well, though with a thick Dutch accent, and he had a habit of laughing at odd moments, even when discussing serious matters, as if he saw humor in the absurdity of the world's horrors. He examined Lucy carefully, asking strange questions. Had she been having vivid dreams? Yes. Had she been near any old cemeteries or ruins recently? Yes, in Whitby. Did she have any marks on her body, particularly on her throat? Mina, who was present during the examination, gasped. How did you know about the marks? Van Helsing looked at the 2 small puncture wounds on Lucy's throat. His face grew grave. He said nothing for a long moment, and then he asked everyone to leave the room except for Arthur and Dr. Seward. When they were alone, Van Helsing spoke. Gentlemen, what I am about to tell you will sound like madness. You will not want to believe me, but I must tell you the truth, for this young woman's life depends on it. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Miss Lucy is the victim of a vampire. Seward stared at him. Professor, surely you're joking. Vampires are folklore, superstition. Van Helsing's expression was deadly serious. I wish that were true, my friend. But I have seen this before. In my travels in Eastern Europe, I have encountered cases that defy medical explanation. The marks on her throat are not from an animal. They are not from disease. They are the bite of the Nosferatu, the undead. A creature that feeds on human blood, that can live for centuries, that can only be destroyed by specific means. Arthur stood up, his face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You're saying my fiancée is being attacked by some sort of monster in London in the year 1897? Yes, Van Helsing said simply. That is exactly what I am saying. Seward put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. Let him explain. Please. Van Helsing continued. The vampire visits her at night. It has been doing so since Whitby, perhaps earlier. Each time it feeds, it takes a little of her blood, a little of her life force. She is being drained, slowly, systematically. If we do nothing, she will die. And when she dies, she will not rest. She will become like the creature that killed her. She will rise as one of the undead, condemned to prey on the living for eternity. The room was silent. Arthur looked like he wanted to hit someone. Seward looked like he was trying to reconcile this madness with his medical training. Finally, Arthur spoke, his voice tight with emotion. If what you say is true, and I'm not saying I believe it, but if it's true, how do we stop it? How do we save her? Van Helsing smiled grimly. That is the right question, my friend. And I have answers. Van Helsing instituted a regime that seemed to belong more to medieval superstition than modern medicine. But Arthur and Seward, out of desperation and respect for the professor, agreed to follow his instructions. First, garlic. Van Helsing brought dozens of garlic flowers and hung them around Lucy's room, over the windows, above the door, around her bed. The smell was overpowering, But Van Helsing insisted it was essential. The vampire cannot abide garlic, he explained. It is a natural barrier, a protection. Second, a crucifix. He placed one around Lucy's neck and told her she must never, under any circumstances, remove it. Faith is powerful, he said. The symbols of faith are weapons against the undead. Third, and most importantly, blood transfusions. Lucy had lost so much blood that she was on the verge of complete collapse. Van Helsing needed to replace what had been taken. In those days, blood transfusions were rare and dangerous, with no understanding of blood types or compatibility. But Van Helsing was willing to take the risk. Arthur volunteered immediately. "Take my blood," he said. "Take all of it if necessary. Just save her." The transfusion was performed. Arthur's blood, rich and healthy, was transferred directly from his veins into Lucy's. The effect was immediate. Color returned to Lucy's cheeks. Her breathing eased. She opened her eyes and smiled weakly at Arthur. "You saved me," she whispered. For a few days, Lucy improved. She seemed stronger, healthier. Arthur was overjoyed. Perhaps the professor's strange methods were working. Perhaps Lucy would recover. But Van Helsing remained watchful, sleeping in a chair outside Lucy's door, keeping guard. And then, one night, Lucy's mother made a terrible mistake. Mrs. Westenra was an elderly woman, in poor health herself, with a weak heart. She loved her daughter dearly and had been staying at Arthur's estate to be near her. She didn't understand Van Helsing's instructions. She thought the garlic was just old superstition, that the smell was making Lucy uncomfortable. So one night, after everyone had gone to bed, Mrs. Westenra went into Lucy's room and removed the garlic from the windows. She opened the windows slightly to let in fresh air. She meant well. She was trying to help. She did not understand that she had just removed the only protection Lucy had. That night, the vampire returned. It came not as a man, but as a wolf. One of Dracula's many forms, one of his many powers. A huge grey wolf, its eyes glowing red, appeared outside Lucy's window. It looked in, seeing Lucy asleep in her bed, seeing Mrs. Westenra dozing in a chair beside her. The wolf reared up on its hind legs and smashed through the window. Glass shattered inward. Mrs. Westenra woke with a scream, saw the beast, and clutched her chest. Her weak heart could not take the shock. She fell back in her chair, dead before she hit the ground. Lucy woke to see the wolf standing over her mother's body. She tried to scream, but terror locked her throat. The wolf transformed, its shape blurring, shifting, and suddenly it was no longer a wolf but a man. A tall, pale man in black, with burning red eyes and sharp white teeth. Count Dracula smiled down at her. "Do not be afraid, my dear," he said in his deep, hypnotic voice. "I am not here to hurt you. I am here to give you a gift. The gift of eternal life." Lucy tried to reach for the crucifix around her neck, but her hand wouldn't move. She was paralyzed, whether by fear or by some power the Count possessed, she didn't know. Dracula bent over her, his mouth opening, his fangs extending. "Soon," he whispered, "you will be mine. Forever." And he bit into her throat, drinking deeply, taking her blood, her life, her future. By the time Van Helsing burst into the room, awakened by the sound of breaking glass, the Count was gone. Mrs. Westenra was dead in her chair, and Lucy was unconscious, pale as death, barely breathing. Van Helsing checked her pulse. It was there, but faint. He checked the wounds on her throat. They were deeper now, open and bleeding freely. "We are losing her," he said. They performed another transfusion. This time, Seward donated his blood. Then Quincy Morris, an American friend of Arthur's, who had also once loved Lucy, gave his blood. Van Helsing even gave his own blood, old as he was, trying desperately to keep Lucy alive. But it was not enough. The vampire had taken too much. Lucy had fought too long. Her body was giving up. On September 20th, 1897, with Arthur holding her hand and Van Helsing praying in Dutch by her bedside, Lucy Westenra died. Arthur collapsed in grief. Seward turned away, unable to watch. Van Helsing closed Lucy's eyes and made the sign of the cross over her body. "God rest her soul," he whispered. But he knew the truth. He knew that for Lucy, death was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far worse. Lucy was buried in the Westenra family crypt in Highgate Cemetery, one of London's most beautiful and Gothic burial grounds. The funeral was small and private. Arthur was inconsolable, blaming himself for not protecting her, for not understanding the danger sooner. Van Helsing attended the funeral but said little. His face was grim, watchful. He knew what was coming. A week after the funeral, strange reports began to appear in the London newspapers. Children were disappearing from the Hampstead area, near Highgate Cemetery. Not many, just 2 or 3. And they weren't gone for long. They would be found the next morning, wandering the streets, confused and frightened, with no memory of where they had been. But they all had the same injury, 2 small puncture wounds on their throats. When interviewed, the children gave similar descriptions of their abductor. They called her the Bloofer Lady, their childish mispronunciation of beautiful lady. They said she was very pretty, with golden hair, and that she had called to them in a sweet voice, asking them to come with her. They said she had been kind at first, and then they couldn't remember. Everything went dark. Van Helsing read these reports and knew exactly what they meant. He gathered Arthur, Seward, and Quincy Morris together and told them the horrible truth. "Lucy is not dead," he said. "Or rather, she is dead, but she walks. She has risen as one of the undead. She is the vampire now. She is the one attacking these children." Arthur exploded in fury. "How dare you? Lucy is dead. She's at peace. How can you say such terrible things about her?" Van Helsing met his anger with compassion. "I know this is hard to believe. I know you loved her. But I must ask you to trust me. Come with me tonight. Come to the cemetery. Let me show you the truth. And if I am wrong, if I am mad, then you may strike me down, and I will not resist." Reluctantly, Arthur agreed. That night, the 4 men went to Highgate Cemetery. They brought weapons, wooden stakes, hammers, crucifixes, though Arthur still did not believe he would need them. Van Helsing led them to the Westenra family crypt. He opened the iron gate with a key he had obtained from the cemetery keeper. They descended the stone steps into the vault. Inside were several coffins, including the newest one, Lucy's. Van Helsing approached Lucy's coffin and used a crowbar to pry open the lid. Arthur tried to stop him, but Seward held him back. "Let him show you," Seward said quietly. The lid came free. Van Helsing lifted it and stepped back. The coffin was empty. No body, no Lucy. Just the white satin lining and the flowers that had been placed with her. "This proves nothing," Arthur said desperately. "Perhaps someone stole her body." "Grave robbers." "Wait," Van Helsing said. "Just wait." They waited in the darkness of the crypt, silent and tense. An hour passed, then another. And then they heard it, footsteps on the stone stairs. Someone was coming. A figure appeared in the entrance to the crypt, silhouetted against the moonlight outside. It was a woman. She wore a white dress, stained with dirt and blood. Her golden hair hung loose around her shoulders. It was Lucy, but it was not Lucy. Her face was the same, her features unchanged, but something essential was different. The kindness was gone from her eyes, the warmth, the humanity. In its place was something predatory, something hungry. And in her arms, she carried a child, a little boy, perhaps 4 years old, unconscious or sleeping. There were fresh bite marks on his throat. Arthur gasped. Lucy! The thing that had been Lucy looked at him and smiled. It was a terrible smile, showing teeth that were too long, too sharp. Arthur, she said, her voice a mockery of the sweet tone he remembered. My love, come to me. We can be together forever. I can make you like me. We can hunt together. She dropped the child carelessly. He fell to the stone floor and didn't wake. She began walking toward Arthur, her arms outstretched, her smile widening. Arthur stood frozen, torn between love and horror. This was Lucy, but it was not Lucy. Van Helsing stepped between them, holding up a crucifix. The vampire, Lucy, hissed and recoiled, her face twisting into a mask of rage and pain. You cannot keep him from me, she snarled. He is mine. No, Van Helsing said firmly. He is not. And neither are you. You are Lucy no longer. You are a creature of darkness, and you must be released from this curse. The vampire Lucy tried to circle around him to reach Arthur, but Van Helsing held the crucifix steady, forcing her back. Finally, with a shriek of frustration, she fled. She ran past them, out of the crypt, and disappeared into the cemetery. Van Helsing immediately checked on the child. The boy was alive, breathing steadily, just in a deep sleep. They carried him out of the cemetery and left him on a doorstep near a police station, where he would be found and returned to his family. Then Van Helsing turned to Arthur. Now do you believe? He asked gently. Arthur's face was wet with tears. What do we have to do? He whispered. They returned to the cemetery the next night, just before dawn. This time, they were prepared. Van Helsing brought the tools they would need: a wooden stake sharpened to a point and a heavy hammer. Also, a surgeon's saw and a large crucifix. They entered the crypt again. Lucy's coffin was once more occupied. The vampire had returned to her resting place before sunrise, as vampires must. Van Helsing opened the coffin. Lucy lay inside, looking peaceful, beautiful, as if merely sleeping. But they knew the truth now. Who will do it? Van Helsing asked quietly. It must be someone who loved her. Only love can free her. Arthur stepped forward. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. I will. Van Helsing placed the wooden stake over Lucy's heart. He handed Arthur the hammer. When you strike, he said, strike true and hard. Do not hesitate, and know that you are not killing her. You are freeing her. You are giving her soul the peace it deserves. Arthur raised the hammer. He looked down at Lucy's face one last time. I love you, he whispered. Forgive me. And he brought the hammer down. The stake drove through her heart. Lucy's eyes flew open. Her mouth opened in a scream, not of pain, but of rage. Her body convulsed, her hands reaching up like claws. The scream echoed through the crypt, a sound of pure hatred and fury. Arthur struck again, and again, driving the stake deeper, tears streaming down his face. And then, suddenly, the change came. The rage left Lucy's face. The snarl softened, her features relaxed, and for just a moment, she looked like herself again, like the Lucy they had known and loved. Her eyes met Arthur's, and they were clear, human, grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she was gone. Her body aged rapidly, the illusion of life fading. She became a corpse, truly dead now, at peace. The vampire was destroyed. Lucy's soul was free. Van Helsing completed the ritual. He cut off Lucy's head with the surgeon's saw, a gruesome necessity to ensure the vampire could not return. He filled her mouth with garlic and placed the crucifix on her chest. "It is done," he said. "She is at rest now. She is with God." They sealed the coffin and left the crypt. Arthur would never speak of that night again. The official story was that Lucy had died of an illness, and that was the end. The newspapers stopped reporting on the Bloofer lady. The children stopped disappearing. The nightmare was over. But Van Helsing knew the truth. Lucy had been a victim. She had been killed by a vampire. And that vampire was still out there, still hunting, still feeding. They had won a battle, but the war was just beginning. While they were in the cemetery, giving Lucy her true death, something was happening in London. Something terrible. Mina Harker, who had been staying with friends, recovering from the trauma of losing Lucy, was alone in her room. Her husband, Jonathan, had finally returned from Transylvania. He was damaged, traumatized, speaking of nightmares and monsters, but he was alive. They had married as soon as he was strong enough, and now they were trying to rebuild their lives. But tonight, Jonathan was out. He had gone to meet with Van Helsing and the others, to tell them about his experiences in Castle Dracula. He had left Mina alone, thinking she was safe. He was wrong. Count Dracula had noticed Mina from the very beginning. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was intelligent, strong, resourceful. She was not like Lucy, who had been fragile, easy prey. Mina was different. Mina was a challenge, and Dracula had always enjoyed a challenge. He appeared in Mina's room like a shadow, materializing from the darkness. Mina woke to find him standing over her bed, his red eyes gleaming. She tried to scream, but he covered her mouth with his ice-cold hand. "Hush," he whispered. "Do not be afraid. I am not going to kill you, Mina. I have something far better in mind for you." He bent close, his breath cold against her face. "Your friends killed Lucy. They destroyed what was mine. For that, I will take vengeance. I will take you from them. I will make you my bride, my companion, for all eternity." And when they realize what has happened, when they see what you have become, their hearts will break. Mina struggled, tried to fight, but she was powerless against his supernatural strength. Dracula bit into his own wrist, opening a vein, and forced Mina's mouth against it. "Drink," he commanded. "Drink my blood. Create the bond between us. Soon, you will belong to me. Soon you will be mine forever." Mina drank. She couldn't help it. The blood filled her mouth, forced its way down her throat. It was bitter and metallic and wrong, but her body responded to it, craving it in a way that horrified her. When it was done, Dracula released her. He smiled, wiping the blood from his lips. There, it is done. The connection is made. You are marked now, Mina. Even if you flee to the ends of the earth, I will find you. You are mine. And then he was gone, vanishing as quickly as he had appeared. Mina sat in her bed, shaking, gasping for air. She could feel something inside her now, something alien and terrible, a presence in her mind, a voice whispering in the darkness, his voice. When Jonathan returned home, he found Mina curled in a ball on the floor, weeping. She told him everything, and Jonathan's face went white with horror. They had destroyed Lucy to save her soul, but Mina was still alive, still human, but she was infected, corrupted, linked to Dracula by blood. If they killed Dracula, Mina might be freed. But if Dracula killed her first, she would rise as a vampire just as Lucy had. Time was running out. The vampire was no longer hiding. He was striking back. And the battle for Mina's soul, for her very humanity, was about to begin. The next morning, they gathered at Dr. Seward's asylum. Van Helsing, Arthur Holmwood, Dr. Seward, Quincy Morris, Jonathan Harker, and Mina herself. Mina insisted on being present, despite Jonathan's protests. "This is about me," she said firmly. "I have a right to know what we're facing." Jonathan had brought his journal, the detailed account of his time in Castle Dracula. He had been too traumatized to speak of it clearly before, but now, with Van Helsing's patient questioning, the full story came out. The castle, the Count's plans to move to England, the boxes of earth, the 3 vampire women, the desperate escape. Van Helsing listened carefully, making notes. When Jonathan finished, the professor nodded. "It all makes sense now. The creature you encountered, Jonathan, is the same creature that killed Lucy. His name is Dracula. He is not merely a vampire. He is perhaps the oldest and most powerful vampire still in existence." "Who is he?" Arthur asked. "Where did he come from?" Van Helsing stood and paced as he spoke. "I have been researching this using my contacts in Eastern Europe. The name Dracula comes from the Romanian word for dragon or devil. There was a historical figure, a prince of Wallachia, who bore this name. Vlad Dracula, or Vlad Tepes as he was known. Vlad the Impaler." "Impaler?" Mina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He lived in the 15th century, Van Helsing continued. A warrior who fought against the Ottoman Empire. He was brilliant, ruthless, and extraordinarily cruel. He earned his nickname from his preferred method of executing his enemies, impalement on wooden stakes. He would create forests of the impaled, thousands of men, women, and children left to die slowly in agony as a warning to others." The room fell silent, everyone absorbing this horror. Van Helsing continued. "He died in battle in 1476, or so history tells us. But the legends say something different. They say Vlad made a pact with dark forces, that he refused to accept death, that he returned as something no longer human. He became Nosferatu, vampire, and he has existed for over 400 years, feeding on the living, sleeping in his grave dirt, moving from place to place when necessary. And now he's here," Seward said. "In London. Yes. And he is not merely feeding at random. He is strategic, intelligent. He purchased multiple properties across London before he even arrived. According to Jonathan's account, there were 50 boxes of earth sent from Castle Dracula. These boxes are his safe houses, his resting places. During the day, when he is vulnerable, he must sleep in one of these boxes. At night, he can move freely, hunt freely. "Then we destroy the boxes," Arthur said immediately. "We find them and destroy them all. Leave him nowhere to hide." Van Helsing nodded. "Exactly. We hunt the hunter. We make him vulnerable. And then, when we have him cornered, we kill him. A stake through the heart, decapitation, and he will be destroyed forever." "But how do we find the boxes?" Seward asked. Jonathan pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I have the property deeds. The Count left them in his library. I took them when I escaped. I didn't know if they would be important. But I thought..." He spread the papers on the table. He purchased properties in 6 locations around London. An estate in Purfleet, a house in Bermondsey, a property in Mile End, and 3 others. Van Helsing smiled grimly. "Then we know where to begin." But Mina spoke up, her voice troubled. "There's something else. Something you need to know." She paused, gathering her courage. When he came to me last night, he didn't just bite me. He made me drink his blood, and now I can feel him in my mind. It's like a presence, a voice whispering, and sometimes I can see things. Flashes of what he sees, where he is. Everyone stared at her. Van Helsing leaned forward intently. "This is both terrible and wonderful," he said. "Terrible because it means the bond between you is strong, but wonderful because it means you can track him. You can tell us where he is, what he is doing." "But the bond works both ways, doesn't it?" Mina asked. "If I can sense him, he can sense me. He knows where I am, what I'm thinking." Van Helsing's expression darkened. "Yes, that is the danger. We must be very careful. He can use you against us. He can find us through you." "Then we have to work quickly," Quincy Morris said. The American had been silent until now, but his voice was determined. "We find those boxes. We destroy them. We force him out into the open. And we kill him before he can complete his claim on Mrs. Harker." They made their plan. They would split into teams and investigate each of the properties Jonathan had identified. They would find the boxes of earth and destroy them, make them unusable by mixing them with holy water or by scattering them entirely. They would cut off the Count's sanctuaries one by one until he had nowhere left to hide in London. And then they would hunt him down and end him. "But what about Mina?" Jonathan asked desperately. "How do we save her?" Van Helsing placed a hand on his shoulder. "If we kill Dracula before the transformation completes, before Mina dies and rises as vampire, she will be freed. The bond will break. She will be herself again." "And if we fail?" Jonathan whispered. Van Helsing didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all knew what would happen. If they failed, Mina would die, and then she would rise as the undead, a vampire like Lucy had been, and someone would have to drive a stake through her heart to free her soul. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. "Then we won't fail." "We can't." Over the next several days, they worked systematically. They would arrive at one of Dracula's properties during the day, when the Count was sleeping, vulnerable. They would break in, find the boxes of earth hidden in cellars or locked rooms, and destroy them. The first property was in Purfleet, a large abandoned estate next to Dr. Seward's asylum. It had been purchased months earlier, but never occupied. The locals said it gave them a bad feeling, that strange noises came from it at night. They broke in through a side door. The house was dark, dusty, smelling of decay. In the cellar, they found 12 boxes of earth, neatly arranged. Van Helsing opened each box, blessed the earth with holy water, and mixed in fragments of the communion wafer. The earth began to smoke and steam as if burning from within. "This soil can no longer protect him," Van Helsing said. "It is sanctified now. Holy, he cannot rest here." They moved to the next property, and the next. Each time, they found boxes of earth. Each time, they destroyed them. Slowly, methodically, they were closing the net. But Dracula knew what they were doing. Mina could sense his rage, his fury at having his sanctuaries violated, and she could sense that he was planning something. A counterattack. Revenge. "He's watching us," Mina said one evening, her face pale. "He knows where we are. He's amused. He thinks we're fools. He thinks we can't stop him." "Let him think that," Van Helsing said. "Pride makes one careless. We will use his arrogance against him." But that night, when Jonathan and Mina returned to their lodgings, they found the door broken open. Inside, their room had been ransacked, furniture overturned, papers scattered, Mina's belongings torn apart, and on the bed, written in something dark and red, blood, they realized with horror, was a message. "You cannot escape me. You are mine." Jonathan immediately packed their things. They would not stay here. They moved to Dr. Seward's asylum, where they could be protected by the group, where Mina would not be alone and vulnerable. But that night, as Mina tried to sleep, she felt Dracula's presence more strongly than ever. She could see through his eyes. She saw him standing in the street outside the asylum, looking up at her window. She saw his smile, and she heard his voice in her mind. "Soon, my dear, very soon. Your friends cannot protect you forever. And when I take you, I will make them watch. I will make them see what you become. And then I will destroy them, one by one, until nothing remains but the memory of their failure." Mina woke screaming. Jonathan held her, but she couldn't stop shaking. The presence in her mind was growing stronger. She could feel herself changing. Her senses were sharper. Light hurt her eyes. She was developing a sensitivity to the crucifix Van Helsing had given her. It burned her skin when she touched it. Time was running out. They had destroyed 49 of the 50 boxes. Only one remained. And they knew where it was. It was in Dracula's first property, the estate in Purfleet. They had destroyed the other boxes there, but Van Helsing suspected the Count had hidden one more, somewhere they hadn't found. A last sanctuary, a final refuge. They returned to the estate in the afternoon, all of them armed with wooden stakes, hammers, crucifixes, and revolvers loaded with bullets they had blessed. They were prepared for a fight, They searched the house again, room by room, and finally, in a hidden chamber behind a false wall in the cellar, they found it. One box of earth, untouched, still consecrated to the Count's use. Van Helsing prepared to sanctify it, but before he could, they heard a sound. Footsteps above them. Heavy footsteps. Multiple sets of footsteps. They had been ambushed. Dracula had known they would come, and he had prepared. They rushed upstairs to find the house filled with Dracula's servants, not willing servants, but poor souls he had mentally dominated, forced to obey his will. Madmen from the nearby asylum, criminals from the London underworld, anyone whose will he had broken. A fight broke out. Quincy Morris and Arthur used their fists and the blunt ends of their stakes to subdue the attackers without killing them. These were innocent victims after all, not willing accomplices. Seward and Jonathan tried to force their way to the door. Van Helsing grabbed Mina and tried to protect her. And then the Count himself appeared. He stood at the top of the stairs, his black cloak billowing around him, his red eyes blazing with fury. "You have destroyed my sanctuaries," he said, his voice echoing through the house. "You have violated my property. You have challenged me in my own domain. You are fools." He descended the stairs slowly, deliberately. Van Helsing held up his crucifix. The Count hissed, but did not retreat. He was too angry, too proud. "You think your trinkets can stop me?" Dracula snarled. "I am the Lord of Darkness. I have existed for centuries. I have destroyed kingdoms. What are you? Nothing. Insects. Dust." But as he spoke, the sun began to set. They could see the light fading through the windows. The Count had been weak during the day, forced to use his servants to fight for him. But now, night was coming. His time of power was returning. They had to act now, while they still had a chance. Jonathan, driven by desperate rage, pulled out his knife and lunged at the Count. Dracula backhanded him casually, sending him flying across the room. Arthur and Quincy rushed forward together. The Count grabbed Arthur by the throat and lifted him off the ground, his strength inhuman. "You killed Lucy," Dracula said, his face inches from Arthur's. "You drove a stake through her heart. For that, I should tear you apart slowly, make you suffer as she suffered." But Quincy Morris, the American who had loved Lucy and who feared nothing, did something unexpected. He pulled out his revolver and fired, not at the Count, but at the window behind him. The glass shattered, letting in the last rays of dying sunlight. The light hit Dracula's face. He screamed in pain and rage, dropping Arthur, raising his arms to shield himself. The sunlight was weak, sunset light, not strong enough to kill him, but it hurt him, weakened him. Van Helsing seized the moment. He rushed forward with a vial of holy water and threw it in the Count's face. The water burned like acid, leaving steaming marks on the vampire's pale skin. Dracula retreated, snarling. "You think you have won?" he spat. "You think you can stop me? I will flee this place. I will return to my homeland, to Transylvania, where I am strong, where I am protected, and when I have recovered, I will return. I will hunt you down, all of you, and I will make you suffer for eternity." He transformed, his body blurring and shifting, becoming mist. The mist flowed through the broken window and out into the twilight. He was gone. They had driven him away, but they had not killed him. The Count was fleeing back to Transylvania, back to his castle where he would be safe. where he could recover and plan his next move. "We have to follow him," Jonathan said immediately. "We have to finish this. If he escapes, he'll come back, and next time, he'll be ready for us." Van Helsing nodded grimly. "Yes, this ends in Transylvania, where it began." They looked at Mina. She was pale, weak. The mark on her forehead where Van Helsing had touched her with the communion wafer was burning red, refusing to heal. She was still infected, still bonded to Dracula. "Then we go," Mina said quietly. "We follow him, and we end this." The Count had one box left, the one they had found hidden in the estate. He had managed to reclaim it during the fight, using his servants to carry it out while they were distracted. He was taking it with him back to Transylvania. One box of earth, one refuge, but it was enough. With that box, he could survive the journey. With that box, he could return to his castle and be safe. They had to reach him before he got there. Because if Dracula made it back to Castle Dracula, back to his stronghold filled with his grave earth and his dark power, they might never be able to kill him. He would be too strong, too protected, and Mina was running out of time. The mark on her forehead was growing darker. She was sleeping during the day now and waking at night. Her skin was growing paler. Her teeth were becoming sharper. The transformation was progressing. Soon it would be irreversible. Soon she would die and rise as the undead, and they would lose her forever. They had perhaps days, a week at most. The race against time had begun. The hunters were now the hunted, and the final battle would take place in the mountains of Transylvania, in the shadow of Castle Dracula, where the nightmare had first begun. One way or another, this would end in blood. They left London within 24 hours. There was no time to waste, no time for proper preparation. Every hour that passed brought Mina closer to her transformation and brought Dracula closer to the safety of his castle. Van Helsing made the arrangements. They would travel by train across Europe, London to Paris, Paris to Vienna, Vienna to Budapest, and then north into the Carpathian Mountains. It was the same route Jonathan had taken months earlier when he had been an innocent solicitor traveling to meet a client. Now he was returning as a hunter, armed with knowledge and weapons, determined to destroy the monster that had nearly destroyed his wife. The group consisted of 6 people: Van Helsing, Jonathan Harker, Mina Harker, Dr. Seward, Arthur Holmwood, and Quincy Morris. 6 ordinary people, armed with crucifixes and stakes and faith, pursuing one of the most powerful creatures that had ever existed. On the surface, it seemed like madness. What chance did they have against a being who had survived for 4 centuries, who could command storms and wolves, who could transform into mist and bat, who possessed strength far beyond any human? But they had 2 advantages, 2 weapons that Dracula could not match. The first was desperation. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for Mina's soul. That kind of motivation gave them strength beyond the physical. The second was Mina herself. The blood bond that connected her to Dracula worked both ways. When she was in a hypnotic trance, induced by Van Helsing's careful guidance, she could see through the Count's eyes, sense his location, know his plans. She was their tracking device, their spy in the enemy camp. But using this connection was dangerous. Every time Mina opened herself to the bond, Dracula could also sense her. He could know where they were, what they were planning. It was a double-edged sword that required careful timing and courage. As they traveled east, racing across Europe by train, Van Helsing would hypnotize Mina twice a day, at sunrise and sunset, when the Count was at his most vulnerable, transitioning between wakefulness and sleep. "What do you see, Mina?" Van Helsing would ask gently. And Mina, her eyes closed, her voice, distant and dreamy, would describe what she sensed. "Water. I hear water. The lapping of waves. He's on a ship. He's in his box, in the cargo hold. The ship is traveling up a river. I can hear the crew above, speaking in Romanian, I think, or Russian. The Danube. He's on the Danube River heading north." "Good," Van Helsing would say. "Very good. Come back now, Mina. Come back to us." And Mina would wake, gasping, her hand clutched to her throat, the mark on her forehead burning as if it had been branded there. They traced Dracula's route. He had left England by ship, traveling across the North Sea to Varna, the same port he had departed from months earlier. From there, he had arranged transport up the Danube River by boat, heading toward the Romanian border and eventually to the Sereth River, which would take him close to the Borgo Pass. He was taking the water route. Vampires were said to be unable to cross running water under their own power, but they could be transported across it in a vessel. It was slower than traveling by train, but it was safer for him. Fewer chances of discovery, fewer risks of holy ground or daylight exposure. But his caution gave them an opportunity. By traveling overland, by train and by horse, they might be able to reach Castle Dracula before he did. They might be able to set a trap, to ambush him when he arrived. It was their only chance. As they traveled east, Mina's condition deteriorated. The changes were subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Her skin grew paler, taking on a translucent quality, like porcelain. The dark circles under her eyes deepened. She complained of being cold all the time, even when the train car was warm, even when Jonathan wrapped her in blankets and held her close. She couldn't eat. Food turned her stomach, making her feel ill. The only thing she could keep down was water, and even that was difficult. She was wasting away, growing thinner and weaker with each passing day. But paradoxically, she also seemed stronger in some ways. Her senses were becoming sharper, more acute. She could hear conversations happening 3 train cars away. She could smell blood, the perfume of life, and it made her mouth water in a way that horrified her. And the light hurt her. Not just bright sunlight, but even normal daylight made her eyes ache. She took to wearing dark glasses and keeping the curtains drawn in their train compartment. The mark on her forehead, the burn from where Van Helsing had touched her with the communion wafer, refused to heal. It was angry and red, a brand marking her as impure, as corrupted by evil. When they passed churches or crossed onto holy ground, the mark would burn as if fresh, and Mina would cry out in pain. "I'm becoming like him," she said to Jonathan one night, tears streaming down her face. "I can feel it happening. I can feel the humanity draining out of me bit by bit. Soon there won't be anything left. Soon I'll be a monster, just like Lucy was." Jonathan held her tight. "No, we won't let that happen. We're going to kill him, Mina. We're going to end this, and you're going to be free." But in his heart, Jonathan was terrified. What if they were too late? What if Mina died before they could reach the Count? What if the last thing he had to do in this life was drive a stake through the heart of the woman he loved? He couldn't think about it. He could only focus on the hunt, on catching Dracula, on ending the monster's existence. Van Helsing tried to slow the transformation using every method he knew. He gave Mina transfusions of blood from the healthy men in their group, trying to dilute the Count's poison in her veins. He made her drink holy water, though it burned her throat going down. He surrounded her with crucifixes and garlic, though they caused her pain. Nothing worked. The bond was too strong. Dracula's blood was in her, and it was changing her from the inside out. "How long does she have?" Jonathan asked Van Helsing privately. The old professor's face was grave. "Days, perhaps a week, when she stops being able to tolerate the sunlight at all, when she can no longer speak the name of God without pain, when her heart slows to almost nothing, then we will know the end is near. And if we kill Dracula before that happens, then the bond will break. The poison will leave her system. She will recover." Van Helsing paused. "But if she dies before we kill him, if the transformation completes, then she will rise as Nosferatu, and we will have to destroy her, just as we destroyed Lucy." Jonathan closed his eyes. "Then we have to hurry." They reached Budapest and then continued north by train as far as the tracks would take them. But eventually, the trains ended. The modern world ended. They were in rural Romania now, in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains, where the villages were small and scattered, where the roads were dirt paths, where the old ways still held power. They hired horses and a wagon. Van Helsing had arranged for weapons to be waiting for them at a local monastery. Wooden stakes, holy water, communion wafers, crucifixes, and also modern weapons, rifles with silver bullets, knives with blessed blades, and revolvers. "We fight with faith and with steel," Van Helsing said. "We use every weapon God and man have given us." The local people watched them with wary eyes. Strangers didn't come to this region often, especially not well-dressed foreigners carrying strange equipment. When Van Helsing asked for directions to Castle Dracula, the villagers crossed themselves and refused to answer. Finally, an old woman took pity on them. She spoke enough German that Van Helsing could understand her. "You seek the castle of the devil," she said. "Why? What madness drives you?" "We hunt the devil," Van Helsing replied simply. "We're going to kill him." The old woman looked at Mina, at the mark on her forehead, at her pale skin and dark-circled eyes. The woman understood immediately what she was seeing. "The vampire has claimed her," she whispered. "You are too late. She is already lost." "No," Jonathan said firmly. "She's not lost. Not yet. We still have time." The old woman shook her head sadly. "Time is the one thing you do not have, young man. But I will pray for you. I will pray for all of you, and I will tell you what you need to know." She gave them directions to the Borgo Pass, to the old road that led to Castle Dracula. She also gave them a warning. He is strongest at his castle. It is his place of power. You will be walking into his lair, where he commands the very stones and shadows. Even if you reach him before he reaches the castle, he will still have advantages you cannot imagine. "We know," Van Helsing said, "but we have no choice." The old woman pressed something into Mina's hand. It was a small wooden cross, crudely carved, old and worn from centuries of use. "Take this," she said. "It belonged to my grandmother. and to her grandmother before that. It has protected my family from evil for many generations. Perhaps it will protect you. Mina tried to hand it back. The touch of holy items hurt her now, but the old woman refused. The pain means it is working. Keep it. You will need all the protection you can get. They thanked her and rode on into the mountains, following the path Jonathan remembered from his first journey. The path that led to Castle Dracula. As they climbed higher, the landscape became more desolate. Bare rocks, twisted trees, deep shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The wind howled through the peaks, sounding almost like voices, almost like laughter. This was Dracula's homeland. These mountains had known his presence for 400 years. This place remembered him, and it was not welcoming to those who came to destroy him. At night, they heard wolves howling. Not normal wolves. These howls were different, organized, as if the animals were communicating, as if they were being directed by an intelligence. The Count's spies, his servants. And twice, as they camped in the forest, they saw glowing red eyes watching them from the darkness. Eyes that disappeared when they raised their crucifixes or fired their rifles. Dracula knew they were coming. He was preparing his defenses, gathering his strength. The race was going to be close. On their last night before reaching the Borgo Pass, something terrible happened. They had made camp in a sheltered valley, building a fire, setting up watches. Van Helsing had drawn a protective circle around their camp using holy water and crushed communion wafers, a barrier that the undead could not cross. Mina was sleeping fitfully in the tent she shared with Jonathan, but as midnight approached, she began to scream. Jonathan rushed to her side. She was having some kind of seizure, her body convulsing, her eyes rolled back in her head. Foam flecked her lips. The mark on her forehead was glowing, burning as if it were on fire. Van Helsing came running. He immediately recognized what was happening. He's calling her. The Count is using the blood bond to summon her to him. He wants her to come to the castle. How do we stop it? Jonathan cried. We can't. The bond is too strong now. All we can do is restrain her, keep her within the protection circle, and wait for it to pass. They held Mina down as she thrashed and screamed. She wasn't conscious. She was caught in some kind of trance, neither awake nor asleep, her mind trapped in the psychic call from her master. And then she began to speak. But it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, older, with a thick Romanian accent. It was Dracula's voice, speaking through her. You are fools to come here, the voice said, Mina's mouth forming words that weren't hers. This is my land, my domain. You have no power here. Turn back while you still can. Leave the woman. She is mine. She has always been mine. Van Helsing leaned close. We will not turn back, Count. And Mina is not yours. She belongs to herself, to her husband, to God. You are a usurper, a thief, a monster, and we are coming to end you. Mina's face twisted into a smile that was not hers. End me. I have existed for 4 centuries. I have survived wars, plagues, hunters far more skilled than you. What makes you think you can succeed where so many have failed? Because we have something they didn't have, Van Helsing said calmly. We have love. We fight not for glory or revenge, but to save an innocent soul. And that love gives us strength you cannot understand, creature of darkness. The false smile faded. Mina's face contorted in rage. Then come to my castle. I will be waiting, and I will show you what happens to those who dare to challenge me." Mina went limp. The possession ended. She lay unconscious in Jonathan's arms, breathing shallowly, her skin cold as ice. Van Helsing checked her pulse. She lives, but barely. The bond is almost complete. We have perhaps one more day, maybe two. We must reach the castle tomorrow, or it will be too late. In the morning, Mina woke, but she was different. Weaker, more distant. The humanity in her eyes was fading, being replaced by something cold and predatory. She couldn't travel in the daylight anymore. Even the filtered light through the clouds caused her pain. They fashioned a covered litter, draping it with thick blankets to keep out the sun, and Mina lay inside, silent and still. "I'm dying," she said quietly to Jonathan. "I can feel it. The person I was is slipping away. Soon there will be nothing left but the monster. You have to promise me something." "Anything," Jonathan said, his voice breaking. "If you don't kill him in time, if I die and rise as what Lucy became, promise me you'll do what needs to be done. Promise me you'll free my soul. Don't let me exist as a monster. Don't let me hurt people, please." Jonathan couldn't speak. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face. Mina squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I love you. I've always loved you. Remember that. Remember me as I was, not as what I might become." They traveled on, racing against the setting sun, racing against death itself. Late in the afternoon, they crested a ridge and saw it. Castle Dracula. It stood on a mountain peak, silhouetted against the darkening sky. A massive stone fortress, ancient and crumbling in places, but still imposing, still powerful. The towers reached toward the clouds like claws. The walls were thick and high, built to withstand sieges. It looked like something from a nightmare, a place where evil had taken physical form. And surrounding the castle, circling it like carrion birds, were hundreds of bats. They filled the sky, their wings blotting out the dying light, their screeches echoing across the valley. "He's already there," Seward said, his voice hollow. "We're too late. He beat us." "No," Van Helsing said. "Look, at the base of the mountain. Do you see?" They looked where he was pointing. On the winding road that led up to the castle, they could see a group of men, gypsies, from the look of them, pulling a wagon. And on that wagon was a large wooden box, the last box of Earth. Dracula's final sanctuary. He was being transported to his castle, but he hadn't arrived yet. He was still in the box, still vulnerable. "We still have a chance," Van Helsing said. "If we can reach him before he enters the castle, before the sun sets completely, we can destroy him." They spurred their horses forward, racing down the mountain slope toward the road below. The gypsies saw them coming and began to move faster, whipping their horses, trying to reach the castle before these strange foreigners could catch them. It was a race, a desperate final race with the sun sinking rapidly toward the horizon, with Mina dying in the covered litter, with hundreds of bats screaming overhead, with Castle Dracula looming above them like a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. Everything came down to this moment, this one chance. They had to reach the box before sunset. They had to destroy Dracula before night fell and his full power returned. They had to win. The gypsies were armed, knives, clubs, old rifles. They had been paid to protect the box, and they would fight to fulfill their contract, not knowing or caring what was inside it. But the hunters were desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. Quincy Morris rode ahead of the others, his American cowboy skills evident as he maneuvered his horse alongside the wagon. He pulled out his revolver and fired, not at the gypsies, but at the ropes holding the box to the wagon bed. The rope snapped, the box shifted, unstable. Arthur and Jonathan rode up on the other side. They leapt from their horses onto the moving wagon, grappling with the gypsies, fighting to reach the box. The wagon overturned. The box fell, hitting the ground hard. The lid cracked. Van Helsing and Seward dismounted and rushed forward, wooden stakes and hammers in hand. The gypsies fought back, trying to protect their cargo, but they were being overwhelmed. These foreigners were fighting with a ferocity that was almost supernatural. Jonathan reached the box first. He grabbed a crowbar and began prying at the lid. The wood splintered, the nails pulled free. The sun was a sliver of red on the horizon. Perhaps 1 minute of daylight left, perhaps less. The lid came free. Jonathan threw it aside. Inside the box, lying in his native earth, was Count Dracula. His eyes were open, red, burning with hatred and fury. His mouth opened in a snarl, revealing his fangs. "You are too late," the Count hissed. "Night comes, and when it does, I will tear you apart. I will make you suffer for daring to challenge me." Jonathan raised his knife. "Not if we kill you first." The sun touched the horizon. The last ray of daylight painted the mountain red, and the final battle began. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but those 10 seconds would be remembered, retold, and analyzed for over a century. Jonathan Harker, driven by months of terror, rage, and desperate love, brought his kukri knife, a large curved blade he had purchased in London, down in a sweeping arc. The blade, blessed by Van Helsing with holy water, struck true. It cut through Dracula's throat like a scythe through wheat. At the same moment, Quincy Morris, who had fought his way through the remaining gypsies, drove his bowie knife deep into the Count's chest, piercing the heart. For one frozen moment, time seemed to stop. Count Dracula's eyes widened, not in fear. He had lived too long to fear death, but in something like surprise. Surprise that these mortals, these insects, had actually succeeded. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Only blood, dark and thick. Far too much blood for a body that should have been dead for centuries. And then, something extraordinary happened. The Count's face changed. The rage melted away. The hatred faded. And for just an instant, the hunters saw something else in his eyes. Something almost human. Relief, perhaps, or peace. As if some part of him, some last, buried fragment of the man he had been 400 years ago, was grateful that it was finally over. Dracula's lips moved, a whisper, so faint they almost missed it. "It is finished." And then he crumbled. His body didn't just die, it disintegrated. It turned to dust, ancient dust. The accumulated decay of 4 centuries catching up with him all at once. His flesh, his bones, his black clothing, all of it dissolved into fine grey powder that blew away on the wind. In less than 5 seconds, Count Dracula, the most powerful vampire in history, ceased to exist. All that remained was a pile of dust in a box of earth. And even that was scattering, being carried away into the twilight. The gypsies, seeing their employer literally turn to dust before their eyes, fled in terror. They ran up the mountain road toward the castle, disappearing into the gathering darkness, leaving their weapons behind. The hunters stood in silence, barely able to comprehend what had just happened. After months of pursuit, after all the death and terror and sacrifice, it was over. Just like that. Over. And then someone screamed. It was Mina. Mina had been lying in her covered litter, too weak to move, too far gone to even speak. But the moment Dracula died, the moment his body turned to dust, something happened to her. The blood bond shattered. She felt it like a physical snap, like a chain that had been wrapped around her heart suddenly breaking. The presence in her mind, the dark, whispering voice that had haunted her for weeks, fell silent, vanished, gone. And then the pain began. The poison, Dracula's blood, Dracula's curse, began to leave her body, and it left violently, burning its way out. She screamed as her body convulsed, her back arching, her hands clawing at her own skin. Jonathan ran to her, terrified. "Mina! Mina, what's happening?" Van Helsing was right behind him. He examined her quickly, then his face broke into a smile, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in weeks. "It's working," he said. "The curse is breaking." Her body is purging the corruption. Mina's skin, which had been death pale for days, was flushing with color. Her breathing, which had been shallow and labored, was deepening. The mark on her forehead, the angry red burn that had branded her as the vampire's victim, was fading, the scar tissue smoothing out, disappearing. She gasped, taking in a huge breath, as if she had been drowning and had just broken the surface. Her eyes flew open, clear, bright, human eyes, no longer tinged with red. "Jonathan?" she whispered. He was crying now, holding her hands. "I'm here. I'm here, Mina. You're back. You're yourself again." She touched her own face, as if needing to confirm she was real. "Is he dead?" Jonathan said. "Dust. Gone. It's over, Mina. It's finally over." She began to weep, tears of relief and joy and exhaustion. "I can't feel him anymore. He's not in my head. It's quiet. It's finally quiet." Van Helsing checked her forehead. The mark was completely gone, as if it had never been there. "The transformation has been completely reversed," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "She is free. Truly free." They helped Mina sit up. She was weak, certainly. She had been dying for days, and her body would need time to recover. But she was alive, human, saved. The nightmare was over, and then they heard the groan. Quincy Morris was on the ground, his hand pressed to his side. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and red. In the fight with the gypsies, in the desperate rush to reach the box, he had been wounded. A knife thrust between his ribs by one of the men protecting the wagon. In the chaos, no one had noticed. Quincy himself hadn't said anything, focused entirely on the mission, on destroying Dracula. Now, with the adrenaline fading, the wound was making itself known. Arthur and Seward rushed to him. They tore open his shirt, trying to assess the damage. It was bad, very bad. The blade had gone deep, possibly puncturing a lung, certainly severing important blood vessels. "We need to get him to a doctor," Seward said desperately. "We need to—" "No," Quincy said quietly. He was smiling, of all things, smiling peacefully. "It's all right, boys. I'm not going to make it. I can feel it. But that's okay. Don't say that, Arthur said, his voice breaking. First Lucy, and now Quincy. How much loss could one man bear? Quincy looked past them to where Mina was sitting up, alive and well, the mark gone from her forehead. We did it, he said. Look at her. She's free. She's going to live. He coughed, blood flecking his lips. It was worth it. All of it. Worth it to see that. Quincy, Jonathan began. No, listen to me. Quincy's voice was getting weaker, but his eyes were clear. You all came here to save Mrs. Harker. And we did it. We actually did it. How many people can say they killed a monster and saved a soul in the same day? That's not a bad way to go out, boys. Not bad at all. Mina crawled to his side, tears streaming down her face. Don't leave us, she said. Please, you saved my life. Let us save yours. Quincy reached up and touched her face gently. You're going to be fine, ma'am. You're going to have a long, happy life with that husband of yours. You're going to have children and grandchildren, and you're going to tell them stories. And maybe, sometimes, you'll tell them about the crazy American who loved adventure a little too much. He smiled. That's all the immortality I need. His hand fell, his breathing slowed, and as the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, as true night fell over the Carpathian Mountains, Quincy Morris closed his eyes for the last time. He died with a smile on his face. They buried him there, in the shadow of Castle Dracula, with a makeshift cross made from 2 pieces of the broken box that had held the vampire. Van Helsing said prayers over him in 3 languages, and they vowed that Quincy Morris would not be forgotten, that his sacrifice would be remembered. 1 life lost, but so many saved. They left Transylvania the next day. There was nothing more to do there. The castle was empty. They checked and found nothing but dust and ruins. The 3 vampire women that Jonathan had encountered months earlier were gone, either destroyed when Dracula died or fled to hide somewhere in the mountains. The nightmare was over. The journey back to England was quiet. They were exhausted, traumatized, grieving, but they were alive. And more importantly, Mina was alive and free. By the time they reached London, Mina had regained most of her strength. The color had returned fully to her face. She could eat again, could walk in daylight again, could hold a crucifix without pain. It was as if the entire ordeal had never happened, except for the memories, and the memories would never fade. They returned to their lives, or tried to. Dr. Seward went back to his asylum. Arthur Holmwood used his wealth to fund hospitals and medical research, unable to shake the guilt of not being able to save Lucy. Van Helsing returned to Amsterdam, continuing his studies of the supernatural, now armed with first-hand experience that would guide his research for the rest of his life. Jonathan and Mina Harker tried to rebuild their marriage, their life. It took time. The trauma had marked them both deeply, but they had survived together, fought together, and that bond was unbreakable. 7 years later, they had a son. They named him Quincy after the friend who had sacrificed his life to save Mina's. The boy grew up happy and healthy, never knowing how close he had come to never existing at all. And one autumn, when Quincy was 6 years old, Jonathan and Mina decided to return to Transylvania. Not to the castle, they would never go back there, but to the mountains, to the place where it had all ended. They stood on a ridge, looking out over the valley, holding their son's small hand between them. In the distance, they could see the ruins of Castle Dracula, even more decayed than before, slowly crumbling into the mountain itself. "Was it real?" Mina asked quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if we imagined it all, if it was just some kind of shared madness." Jonathan squeezed her hand. "It was real. The scars prove it. The memories prove it. Quincy Morris's grave proves it." "And yet," Mina said, "no one believes us. We tried to tell people to warn them, but they just think we're mad." Jonathan smiled sadly. "Maybe that's for the best. Let the world think vampires are just stories. Let them think evil can't be real. As long as we know the truth, as long as we remember what we fought for, that's enough." Young Quincy tugged on his mother's hand. "Mama, what are we looking at?" Mina knelt down and hugged her son. "We're looking at a place where very brave people fought a terrible monster," she said. "And they won. They saved someone very important." "Who did they save?" the boy asked. "They saved me," Mina said simply. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scent of pine and stone and old earth. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, but it was just a wolf, nothing more, just an animal calling to its pack. The nightmare was over. The Count was dead, and the world had moved on, forgetting that for one brief, terrible time, a vampire had walked the streets of London, had killed and corrupted, had nearly won. But it had not won. It had been destroyed by ordinary people with extraordinary courage, by love and faith and determination. The story could have ended there. Jonathan and Mina and their son, standing on a mountain ridge, looking at ruins, carrying memories that no one else would believe. But this story, this particular story, didn't end with the Harkers or with the Count. It ended and began again with a man sitting in a cramped office above a London theatre, writing by candlelight, creating a tale that would outlive them all. Now, let us step away from the story. Let us leave the mountains of Transylvania, the London fog, the vampire's castle. Let us return to the real world, to Victorian England, to the year 1890. And let us meet the man who created it all. His name was Bram Stoker, and he was not an adventurer, not a vampire hunter, not a hero. He was a theatre manager with a day job and literary ambitions that no one took seriously. By day, he ran the Lyceum Theatre in London, one of the most prestigious theatrical venues in the world. He managed every aspect of the operation, booking shows, handling finances, dealing with actors and their egos, making sure the great actor Henry Irving, his employer and friend, had everything he needed. It was exhausting, all-consuming work. The theatre opened in the evening, which meant Bram's day started in the afternoon and didn't end until well past midnight. He would collapse into bed in the early hours of the morning, sleep for a few hours, then rise and do it all again. And yet, despite this crushing schedule, Bram Stoker had a dream, a secret ambition. He wanted to be a writer. He had published a few things, short stories, essays, a novel that no one had read, but he wanted to write something important, something that would last, something that would make people remember his name long after he was gone. He just didn't know what that something was. Until one summer, when he took a rare vacation with his wife and son to a small coastal town called Whitby on the northeast coast of England. Whitby in 1890 was a picturesque seaside town, the kind of place Victorians loved for summer holidays. It had a beautiful harbour, dramatic cliffs, an old ruined abbey on the hilltop, and a graveyard filled with weathered headstones that overlooked the sea. Bram Stoker spent his days walking along the cliffs, exploring the town, trying to relax after months of stress at the theatre. But his mind never truly rested. He was always observing, always collecting ideas, always wondering if any of it could be turned into a story. One afternoon, he climbed the famous 199 steps that led from the harbour up to St. Mary's Church and the ruins of Whitby Abbey. He sat on a bench in the graveyard, looking out over the North Sea, and he let his imagination wander. What if something came from over that sea? Something evil, something old. What if it arrived on a ship, hidden, unseen, and brought darkness to this peaceful town? He had been interested in vampire legends for years. It was a popular topic in Gothic literature. Vampires had appeared in poems and penny dreadfuls, always as mysterious, seductive figures, but they were never quite real. They were always vague, floating on the edges of stories, never fully developed. What if he made a vampire that felt real, that had history, motivation, strategy? What if he grounded the supernatural in the modern world, made it a clash between ancient evil and Victorian progress? He pulled out his notebook and began to write. Later that week, while browsing in the Whitby Public Library, Bram came across a book that changed everything. It was called An Account of the Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia by William Wilkinson, published in 1820. The book contained a brief reference to a Wallachian prince known as Dracula, the dragon, who had fought against the Ottoman Turks in the 15th century. The name hit Bram like a thunderbolt. Dracula. It was perfect, dark, foreign, mysterious. It had the right sound, the right feel. His vampire would be called Dracula. He began researching obsessively. He read everything he could find about Eastern European folklore, about vampire legends, about the historical Vlad Dracula. He corresponded with scholars. He visited the British Museum to read obscure texts on Transylvanian superstitions. And slowly, over the next 7 years, working late at night after his theatre duties were finished, he crafted the story of Count Dracula. The novel that would become Dracula was not written quickly. Bram Stoker worked on it for 7 years, from 1890 to 1897, painstakingly crafting every detail. He made hundreds of notes. He drew maps of Transylvania based on atlases and travel books. Though he never actually visited the region, he sketched floor plans of Castle Dracula. He created detailed timelines of every character's movements. He experimented with different structures before settling on the epistolary format, the story told through diary entries, letters, newspaper clippings, and phonograph recordings. This format was unusual, but it served several purposes. First, it made the story feel real, like historical documents rather than fiction. Second, it allowed him to show different perspectives on the same events, building tension through dramatic irony. And third, it captured the way Victorians actually communicated, through letters and telegrams, through recorded media, through written records. The structure mirrored one of the novel's central themes: modernity versus ancient evil. The characters used modern technology, trains, telegrams, phonographs, blood transfusions, to fight a supernatural threat. It was science and faith working together against darkness. Bram also made the vampire himself strategic and intelligent. His Dracula wasn't a mindless monster. He was a 400-year-old warrior and nobleman who planned his invasion of England carefully, purchased properties legally, studied English law and customs. He was a predator, yes, but a sophisticated one. The novel he created was unlike anything that had come before. It wasn't just a horror story. It was an invasion narrative, a Gothic romance, a study of Victorian anxieties about sexuality and disease and foreign threats. It was ambitious and complex and strange. And when he finished it in 1897, he had no idea if anyone would want to read it. Dracula was published in May 1897 by Archibald Constable and Company in London. The first edition was a hefty volume, over 400 pages, bound in yellow cloth with red lettering. The initial reviews were mixed. Some critics praised it as a thrilling adventure story, well-crafted and suspenseful. Others found it too sensational, too focused on the lurid and the grotesque. One reviewer called it a tale of horrors which is certainly gruesome and repulsive enough. But the worst part, for Bram, was that it didn't sell well. Not at first. A few thousand copies were purchased, mostly by lending libraries. It was not a bestseller. It was not a sensation. It was just another novel in a crowded market, quickly forgotten by most readers. Bram Stoker earned almost nothing from it. He continued his exhausting work at the Lyceum Theatre, continued to struggle financially, continued to dream of literary success that never quite came. He wrote other novels after Dracula, The Jewel of Seven Stars, The Lair of the White Worm, but none achieved even the modest success of Dracula. His name remained obscure. In 1905, Henry Irving, the great actor Bram had served for decades, died suddenly. The Lyceum Theatre closed. Bram was out of a job at age 57, with no savings, no pension, and declining health. He continued to write, but his work grew increasingly strange and unfocused. His health deteriorated. He suffered from what was likely a series of small strokes. His eyesight failed. His memory became unreliable. On April 20th, 1912, Bram Stoker died in London, officially from exhaustion. He was 64 years old. His obituary in the London papers was brief and respectful, but unremarkable. It noted his work at the Lyceum and mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he had written several novels, including one called Dracula. He died believing he had failed as a writer. He died not knowing that he had created one of the most influential works of fiction in history, because the story of Dracula was only beginning. 10 years after Bram Stoker's death, something extraordinary happened in Germany. A filmmaker named F.W. Murnau decided to adapt Dracula into a silent film. But he didn't have the rights to the story, and Bram's widow, Florence Stoker, had refused to grant them. So Murnau simply stole the story, changed the names, and made the film anyway. He called it Nosferatu, a symphony of horror. It was released in 1922. Count Dracula became Count Orlok. The setting moved from London to Germany, but the core story remained the same. a vampire traveling from Eastern Europe to bring darkness to the modern world. Florence Stoker was furious. She sued Murnau and his production company for copyright infringement. She won the lawsuit. The court ordered that all copies of Nosferatu be destroyed. But it was too late. The film had already been seen. Copies had been made and hidden. And the image of the vampire, tall, pale, sinister, with elongated fingers and pointed teeth, had been burned into the public consciousness. Florence's legal victory did something unexpected. It made people curious about the original story. Suddenly, people wanted to read Dracula. The novel was reprinted. Sales increased. And then, in 1931, came the moment that changed everything. Universal Pictures produced a film adaptation of Dracula, starring a Hungarian actor named Bela Lugosi as the Count. This version was official, properly licensed from Florence Stoker, and it was a massive success. Lugosi's performance defined the vampire for generations. The slicked back hair, the evening cape, the thick accent, the hypnotic stare. "I bid you welcome" became one of the most famous lines in cinema. The film was a box office hit. It spawned sequels, imitators, and an entire genre of vampire films, and every single one traced its lineage back to Bram Stoker's novel. Dracula was reprinted again and again. It never went out of print. It was translated into dozens of languages. It was adapted for stage, radio, television, film, comics, and eventually video games. Every vampire story written after 1897 exists in the shadow of Dracula. Every vampire character, from the romantic vampires of Anne Rice to the modern vampires of True Blood and Twilight, carries Dracula's DNA. Bram Stoker had created the definitive vampire, the vampire that all others are measured against. But why? Why has this particular story, out of all the vampire tales told throughout history, become the one that defines the entire mythos? The answer lies in what Bram Stoker understood, perhaps instinctively, about storytelling. He didn't just create a monster, he created a mythology. Dracula has rules. He can't enter a dwelling unless invited. He has no reflection. He sleeps in grave dirt. He can transform into a bat, a wolf, or mist. He commands lesser creatures. He's killed by a stake through the heart, by decapitation, by sunlight. Holy items repel him. These rules make the vampire feel real, consistent, like an actual species that could exist if the laws of nature were slightly different. They give vampire hunters a fighting chance while keeping the vampire dangerous. And Bram grounded his supernatural story in the real world. He used actual locations: Whitby, London, the Carpathian Mountains. He used modern technology. He structured the story like a legal case, with evidence and testimony. This grounding makes the impossible feel possible. But deeper than that, Dracula works because it's about more than vampires. It's about invasion, about corruption, about the fear that something ancient and evil could infiltrate the modern world and destroy it from within. It's about sexuality and disease and death, all the things Victorians were terrified of, but couldn't speak about openly. Dracula is the foreign aristocrat who seduces innocent English women. He's the plague carrier who infects the pure. He's death personified, the reminder that no matter how advanced civilization becomes, we all end up in the grave. Every generation finds new meanings in the story. In the 1920s and 30s, Dracula represented fear of foreigners and immigration. In the 1950s, he was a metaphor for Cold War anxieties. In the 1970s and 80s, he became a tragic, romantic figure. In the 21st century, vampires represent everything from capitalism to pandemic disease to sexual freedom. The story is endlessly adaptable because it's fundamentally about primal fears that never go away. The fear of death, the fear of losing control, the fear of being consumed by something more powerful than ourselves. Bram Stoker, the exhausted theatre manager writing by candlelight after midnight, tapped into something universal. He created a story that transcends its era, that speaks to something deep in the human psyche. And in doing so, he achieved the immortality he had dreamed of, not through a magical elixir, but through the power of story itself. The ruins of Castle Dracula in Romania still attract thousands of tourists every year. They call it Dracula's castle, though the historical Vlad Dracula probably never actually lived there, and the fictional Count Dracula certainly didn't, because he never existed. But people come anyway. They climb the winding stairs. They look out from the towers. They imagine a pale figure in a black cape standing in the shadows. They want to believe, just for a moment, that vampires might be real. And in a way, they are real. Not as physical creatures, but as stories, as myths, as cultural forces that shape how we think about death and immortality and the darkness that lives in human hearts. Count Dracula has appeared in over 200 films, more than any other fictional character except Sherlock Holmes. He's been played by actors from Bela Lugosi to Christopher Lee to Gary Oldman to countless others. He's been portrayed as a monster, a tragic hero, a romantic figure, a comic character, and everything in between. He's inspired thousands of novels, from serious literary works to pulp fiction to romance novels where vampires sparkle in sunlight. He's shaped entire genres of fiction: urban fantasy, paranormal romance, Gothic horror. All of them exist because Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. And yet, Bram Stoker himself remains relatively obscure. Most people who know the name Dracula have no idea who created him. They know the character, but not the author, which is ironic, considering Bram spent his life managing a theatre where actors became famous while he remained in the shadows. But perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps the greatest artists are the ones who create something bigger than themselves, something that takes on its own life and meaning, something that doesn't need its creator's name attached to endure. Bram Stoker died poor, exhausted, believing he had failed. But he had actually succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. He had created a character that would outlive not just him, but his entire era, his entire culture. A character that would still be relevant a century after his death, and that will likely still be relevant a century from now. The vampire arrived on a ghost ship in 1897 in the pages of a yellow-bound novel that most people ignored. He never left, not through supernatural power, but through the power of story, through the human need for myths that help us understand our fears and desires, through the endless adaptability of a tale that can be retold in countless ways, while remaining fundamentally the same. Count Dracula is immortal, not because he drank the blood of the living, but because Bram Stoker gave him something more powerful than blood. He gave him a story that could not die. And that, in the end, is the only real immortality any of us can hope for. To create something that outlives us. To tell a story so compelling that people keep telling it long after we're gone. To leave a mark on the world that time cannot erase. Bram Stoker, the exhausted theatre manager, the forgotten novelist, the man who died thinking he had failed, he achieved that immortality. His vampire walks among us still, in our books and films and dreams, in our fears and our fantasies, in every shadow that moves when we're not quite looking. The Count is dead. Long live the Count. If you've enjoyed this journey into the story behind horror's most famous monster, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We explore the great stories that have shaped our culture, not just the dark ones, but the powerful ones, the enduring ones, the tales that remind us why storytelling matters. In the comments, tell me, what's your favorite adaptation of Dracula? And do you think the character still has power in the modern world, or has he been overused? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Bram Stoker's masterpiece. Thank you for walking with me through Victorian London, through the mountains of Transylvania, and through the mind of the man who created it all. May the story live forever, and may we never forget the man who brought the darkness to life.